It is 3 minutes after 10. Good morning. I know I do this a lot, but just bear with me for a moment. Do you think that in a normal country, the failure of a former Prime Minister to hand over information to is it a judicial inquiry? To an official inquiry into the handling of the COVID pandemic, do you think the failure of a Prime Minister to hand over information demanded and set to a deadline to an official inquiry into a pandemic, the governmental handling of a pandemic, his handling of a pandemic that killed tens of thousands of people, do you think that would be a slightly bigger story? I'm just genuinely asking you, because you know me, I don't trust my antennae or indeed my news sense. But do you think that in a normal country, we can all agree this is not a normal country. Nadine Dorries was Secretary of State for Culture not long ago, and Jacob Rees-Mogg spent 10 minutes as Secretary of State for Business. So we know we're not a normal country anymore. We will be again, hopefully sooner rather than later. But do you think that in a normal country, that would be a rather bigger story than some of the stories getting acres of coverage? Imagine for a moment if the owners and editors of the Daily Mail and The Sun decided that a former Prime Minister failing to hand over information demanded by an official inquiry into his handling of an event that killed thousands of people was actually quite a big story. I don't know. I don't know whether the BBC is a seagull now or a fishing trawler. I've got a horrible feeling that in many areas it's a seagull. It follows the trawler. It seeks to appease media organisations that are dedicated to its destruction. You cannot appease the Murdoch media if you are the BBC. What they should do differently, I don't know. But you can't appease them. And they've decided, the Murdoch media and the Mail and the Telegraph, that the failure of their boy, Johnson's now a Daily Mail columnist. How hard do you think they're going to go in the pursuit of truth or speaking truth to power when it comes to the failure of a Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, to hand over information? It's not just about a phone, it's information, it's communications between him and his key consiglieres at the outbreak in the early days of a truly lethal pandemic. It's incredible, right? And it trends on Twitter, hashtag Boris Johnson's phone. I'm a big fan of Twitter, as you know, but Twitter's falling apart thanks to the intervention of a plutocrat, a right-wing billionaire. It's incredible, really. I mean, how straightforward and how predictable it's all been, but that's falling apart. Now, imagine if it was the Iraq inquiry and Tony Blair hadn't handed over his phone. Yeah, do you think that would be on the front pages today? Anybody? News at 10 maybe, going quite big on that. Tony Blair has failed to meet a deadline set by the official inquiry, the Hutton inquiry into the Iraq war. He says he can't open his phone because some spies have told him not to. That's the country we're living in, right there. It's not a phone in this, I don't think. And I'm not normally a massive fan of counterfactuals, but I am reviewing that position daily now. What would happen? It's usually what would be happening now if this was Diane Abbott or something like that, because the targets painted on her back by right-wing media are, you can see them from space. But that one there, imagine if it was a Labour Prime Minister. In fact, Chris has made the point. Imagine if Tony Blair was obstructing an Iraq inquiry. What do you think would be done to him? 7 minutes after 10 is the time. If Gordon Brown sneezed in the wrong way, says Julie in Suffolk. It is quite, you've got to admit, I know you may well have your blue scarf tied so tightly around your neck that it's cut off the flow of blood to your brain, but it's democracy that gets damaged by this ludicrous scenario. Former Prime Minister refusing, actually, rather than failing, to hand over his the phone containing the WhatsApp messages from the first months of the... And you know why he had to change phones? Do you remember why he had to change phones? Sorry, I will start the programme proper in a minute. I just wanted to get this off my chest because no one else is. Do you remember why he had to change phones? Because it turned out the number for his original phone was still on some press release that had been put out 10 years previously by a think tank when he was Shadow Education Minister. So his phone had been in the public domain for the entirety of his premiership. At that point, they decided he better change his phone. And now apparently he can't turn it on again because spies have told him not to. I don't buy that, do you? And asking or thinking of the difficulty of dedicating a radio phone-in programme to the very simple question of whether or not you believe a politician, that's actually what we're going to do next. We're going to do a phone-in on whether or not you believe a politician. We can't do this every day for two reasons. It's a bit lazy, and it's also occasionally a bit pointless. You don't know what's in your mind, do you? You don't know what's in your mind, what's in the mind of somebody else. This, of course... God, back to Boris Johnson again. This, of course, is the point of Boris Johnson's political career. It actually, I can't believe how right we got this. That idea, do you remember the Jaffa Cake story? Always think of the Jaffa Cakes if you want to work out how Boris Johnson lies. When I was a kid, a student, I shared a house in Battersea with my best friend at the time. And one night, I found myself very hungry. And the nearest shop was quite far away. We had separate food cupboards. You remember what it's like when you're in a shared house. We had separate food cupboards. I was the only person in the house. He was asleep upstairs. And I ate his Jaffa Cakes. I ate an entire packet of Jaffa Cakes, right? And he was and always will be one of the sweetest, most good-natured, most mild-mannered people I have ever had the pleasure. He's godfather to one of my children. He is the loveliest man you could ever meet. I was at school with him for 5 years. I was at university with him for 3. And we shared this place together for a year. And we're still great mates now. And I ate an entire packet of his Jaffa Cakes while he slept upstairs. And then, for reasons I can't quite recall, I refused to admit that I'd done it. And it almost broke him psychologically. It was like a Guantanamo Bay style level of mental torture because it was such a ridiculous lie. But it was also impossible to prove that I was lying because the absence of the Jaffa Cakes from his cupboard did not prove that I had lied. And about 2 years ago, when we were trying to unravel the egregious lies, the unbelievable and endless lies of Boris Johnson, long before, of course, he was found to be a massive liar by a jury of his own peers on the Privileges Committee, I realised that it's all about the Jaffa Cakes. If you know it can't be proved, or even if you are confident that it can't be proved, then it doesn't matter how much weight there is behind the accusation, you will be able to push through. You cannot prove. You remember this. Remember when all the sycophants and forelock tuggers came out to defend him, they all started saying, well, you don't know what was in his mind. You don't know what was... You can't read his mind. So he's obviously lying. Everybody knows he's lying. A bunch of freaks and fetishistic weirdos are determined to pretend that he's not lying, and the only way they can do that is by claiming that what was actually in his mind was completely different from what came out of his mouth and what everybody else could see. So when he said that he didn't know there were any parties, he genuinely didn't know that there were any parties, even though he was at them. That's what I mean. I didn't eat your Jaffa Cakes, but I know that you ate my Jaffa Cake. I saw them in the cupboard before I went to bed. You were the only person in the house. Either you stole my Jaffa Cakes or I got up in the middle of the night, ate them, and somehow managed to dispose, because that was the other terrible thing I did. It's like I got rid of the packaging. The poor bloke emptied the bin in the kitchen to see if it got... I mean, it was a horrible moment. It really was. Horrible moment. I don't know why. I'm ashamed. Ashamed of my behaviour. I really am, but I just refused to admit it. And that is what Robert Jenrick has learnt from Boris Johnson, because here is Robert Jenrick claiming or explaining why he ordered the removal of the murals from the Asylum Processing Centre for Unaccompanied Children in Kent. And just keep the Jaffa Cakes in the back of your mind.
Is it true that he gave orders to the Asylum Reception Centre to paint over children's cartoons? And if so, why? Because nobody believes that Mickey Mouse cartoons either encourage or deter boats to arrive, and they simply think that this is the minister actually not showing some common decency towards vulnerable children.
Well, I've been clear in answer to her right honourable friend that we provide very high quality care, at all of the centres in which we support unaccompanied children, we didn't think that the setup in that particular unit was age appropriate, because the majority of those individuals who were unaccompanied passing through it last year were teenagers.
You buying that, are you? The other story I normally tell at this point is the time that I went, if you've just tuned in for the first time, I don't always approach matters of grave national import with tales from my childhood and my student digs. But I do also remember the time that I went strawberry picking in Chaddesley Corbett, and I ate my own body weight in strawberries, which left enormous amounts of strawberry juice all down my T-shirt and my shorts. Even my legs were bright red. I mean, I was walking strawberry. And I walked into the weighing area with the punnet containing the sort of 7 strawberries that I'd actually put in the punnet rather than just gorging myself on them. And the farmer said, and you know when adults laugh when you're a kid and you kind of like it, and the farmer said, "Did you eat any strawberries?" And I went, "No, sir," like this. And every adult in the tent, in the marquee, started laughing their socks off. That's also, I mean, obviously I'd eaten a lot of strawberries. So, do you believe Robert Jenrick? Let's just remind ourselves what happened in the House of Lords when the same issue was raised with a Home Office minister who I had to look him up. Turns out Liz Truss put him in the House of Lords. 49 days as Prime Minister, and she still gets to put people in the House of Lords, including this character.
To the Rival Centre in Dover, which had cartoons and welcoming signs for children, and which were ordered to be removed by the Home Office Minister because it might make the children feel too welcome. Isn't that a disgrace? And isn't it time that government backbenchers felt as embarrassed as we are that this is happening in our country?
The murals that the Noble Lord refers to were provided by our detention contractors and were not commissioned or approved by the Home Office. It's clearly the correct decision that these facilities have the requisite decoration befitting their purpose.
My lords. My lords.
It was Alf Dubbs, of course, asking the question, Lord Dubbs, himself a beneficiary of the Kindertransport, so a man who knows of what he speaks. So 2 Home Office ministers there, Jenrick and, what's the other fella's name? Is it Simon something? Simon Murray, offering up 2 completely different stories. If you're going to tell a lie, lads, get your stories straight. Seriously, was it they were taken down because they'd been put up without authority by the people who did the decorating at the detention centre, or they were taken down because you felt they were inappropriate for the teenagers passing through? Because I'll tell you one thing about teenagers, traumatised teenagers who've made their way to the UK via some of the most torturous and hideous and terrifying routes imaginable. They're going to be furious if there's a picture of Mickey Mouse on the wall when they finally get to safety. I mean, seriously, they might have escaped from the Taliban, but Tom and Jerry, that could be what tips them over the edge. You better get those murals down fast. Get those murals down quick. Well played, Bobby Jenrick. Honestly, top priority for a Home Office immigration minister, get those murals off those walls. They're teenagers over there, for God's sake. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to tell me, and this is a bit of a diversion and breaking one of my own rules, but you know what they say. Rules are made to be broken. Do you believe Robert Jenrick? 0345 6060 973. Do you believe Simon Murray? 0345 6060 973. Or do you think that they're both despicable liars? 0345 6060 973. 19 minutes after 10 is the time. So down in the shallow end, simple question. Do you believe either of these characters? And you are welcome to, I promise. I'll tell you what, if you want to defend one of them or claim that they're telling the truth, then at the beginning of the call say, James, please don't interrupt me. And then I will let you have a good minute or so to put your case forward without jumping on it. And the second question, down in the slightly deeper end of the conversation today, is why do you think that Simon Murray and Robert Jenrick had 2 completely different reasons for the obliteration of murals at a processing centre for unaccompanied child asylum seekers? Think about that. It's a different question. Why do you think they had 2 completely different excuses? They work in the same building, they are members of the same party, they are ministers in the same government, and they share a brief, one in the Lords, one in the Commons. Have a think, and you can be as serious or as flippant as you like, but how did two senior government politicians answering the same question end up providing two completely different answers? Okay? 0345 6060 973. 21 minutes after 10 is the time. Paul's in Worcester. Paul, what would you like to say?
I actually met the guy that painted those murals.
Really?
Yeah. I was working... I'm going to be very careful what I say, but I was working down there as a contractor. We were working in the same building. I'm actually a healthcare professional, and I was working down there. I was delighted to see the guy. He was an absolute craftsman. He was a sign writer by trade, and he painted them all by hand, and they were just spectacular. To cover those paintings up would have taken layers and layers and layers of paint, because they were very, very bright, let me tell you. And to cover them would have literally... I still think you'd probably see the pictures behind them. Oh, God. I actually saw kids' faces light up when they saw those pictures, which was quite interesting.
But there weren't any kids. There weren't any kids there, Paul. They were all teenagers, mate.
Well, they were, but we'll leave that there, because they just can't talk honestly. One of the points I'd like to make, and this is a little bit cynical, but I think it's important. He says that it was commissioned by the private company that was down there, which, all right, it probably was. However, that private company was being funded by the government.
Yes.
So whatever happened, the guy rightly who did the paintings was paid for out of the coffers of the taxpayer. So actually, you know...
I mean, you've added an extra dimension to the conversation, haven't you? Because it's almost now turning into whose lie was more stupid, the bloke in the House of Lords or the bloke in the House of Commons. So the claim it was the detention contractors that did it. So as you, by your account, a supremely talented signwriter comes in by accident.
Yeah, absolutely.
To do some murals of some cartoon characters.
He was rightly commissioned to do those murals. So yeah, he was paid for, rightly so.
Someone turned up. Who the hell did this? Who are you? What are you doing? Put that paintbrush down. What's going on? I mean, it is just laughable, isn't it?
It's crazy, because actually, I mean, and this is just being absolutely cold and cynical.
Go on.
You know, it was paid for out of public money.
Of course
so actually, you know, who actually had the right to turn around and say, take it down? It's absurd.
It's obscene.
Absolutely.
Actually. It's both.
Yeah,
it's absurd if you see it through the sort of lens of the story. It's obscene if you see it through the eyes of the children.
You couldn't make it up.
Well, no, I didn't. As you know, Emma says, as soon as they realised the optics they'd aimed for, which is the performative cruelty, the cruelty is the point, had completely backfired. They had a crisis meeting, brainstormed as many reasons for it as they could, and they're just so incompetent. They didn't stop to pick one to run with and ended up offering up two completely different answers in different chambers of the Houses of Parliament. It is quite incredible. Does it make it... I mean, I don't want you to be indiscreet or to disclose more information than you want to, but in a scenario where traumatised children are arriving, presumably things like this can make quite a big difference.
Well, I don't have a psychology background, but, you know, what I did see was faces light up and people become relaxed. So, you know, I think what we have to have is an environment that is appropriate and fit the purpose. And, you know, one that is welcoming. Yeah, welcoming, not necessarily we must rush here to see these great paintings.
No, of course.
Like we'd go off to the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa. But, you know, let's have it so it's...
Just doesn't feel like a prison or an institution.
Absolutely, you know, and I think that's not unreasonable, is it?
No, it's not unreasonable. But you add, as I say, another question to the list this morning, which is not just how did they end up with two? How come they couldn't even get their story straight? But whose story was stupidest? Jenrick or Murray? 0345 606 0973 is the number. You need an awful lot of you pointing out that even in your 50s. These pictures bring about a nice feeling. I don't know if you've been to Disneyland or Euro Disney, but I'll let you in on a little secret, shall I? Full of teenagers. Loads of teenagers around the place, absolutely loving it, absolutely smitten by the life-size Mickey Mouses running around the place, and the you know, the frozen princesses. When you become 13, 14, 15, you don't suddenly lose affection for your childhood enthusiasm. So right, all right, let's do it like this. Okay, you can join in via text and tweet on this. I think the best question might be the one that Paul just prompted, which is whose excuse was stupidest, Murray's or Jenrick? And I'm going with Jenrick's at the moment. Paul kind of went with Murray's because of his personal insight. So it's 1-1. Which of these government ministers had the most pathetic excuse for the disgusting decision to paint over murals of cartoons that might possibly make traumatised children feel a tiny little bit safer than they did before? 10:26 is the time. Jenny's in Croydon. Jenny, what do you reckon?
Hi. Nice to speak to you. I think they're both very stupid, in my opinion.
Yes.
Because what their response means is they couldn't get their lives together to be able to come up and actually say the same thing to people,
yes,
which is absolutely not just stupid, it's despicable of these people. So I work with unaccompanied minors in the semi-independent placement,
okay,
and what those parenting could have actually done to children who have been traumatized, have been through horrible journeys, have seen horrible things, is actually would have been a distraction for a minute, even if for a moment, for them to just be curious and said, oh, what is this? Who painted this? Why this color? It would have actually been something that would have actually for a minute or a moment be a relief not to have those traumatic moments. Yeah. So these men are just not despicable. They are horrible human beings. And to come up with those flimsy excuses, it was going to be too much. It was for teenagers. No, adults still got to Disneyland, for crying out loud.
Well, so, yes. Apparently, I don't know what age it is, but apparently you go to bed one night, Jenny, and you really like Disney cartoons, and then you wake up the next morning and you don't like them anymore. Apparently that's how it works.
That's horrible. It's very horrible of them to say, because some of the time what we do in this home is we actually want them to say these things that are destructive, yes, things that make them feel. So it's so painful to hear these people, and I don't know who the eight are that have obviously pulled this lies together for them.
Well, they should be fired for a start. If you're going to tell a lie, at least make sure you're telling the same lie.
What was their PA and all those people that they paid? What did they do? Did anybody make any research for actually coming up with this?
I don't know.
Stupid idea? Did they go to the process centre first?
I don't ask me. Who do you think is worse? The one who said that it was the contractors that did it, or the one that said we took them down because a lot of the children there are teenagers? Who's worse?
Oh, well, the reason why I would think both of them are worse is...
No, you can't have that. You've got to pick one. Sorry, Jenny.
Yeah, the one who said the contractors...
2-1 to Murray. 2-1 to Murray. Because Paul has picked his story apart so completely. It wasn't us that did it. It was the people we paid to decorate the centre. Well, who do you think was going to turn up and decorate the centre? The people you paid to do it, or the actual immigration? I mean, listen to it. Can we listen to it again? Can we listen to the House of Lords one again? Because I think Jenny's onto something here. This is, and Paul together. But then we're letting Robert Jenrick off the hook. Honestly, the burdens I bear on your behalf.
To the rival centre in Dover, which had cartoons and welcoming signs for children, and which were ordered to be removed by the Home Office Minister because it might make the children feel too welcome. Isn't that a disgrace? And isn't it time that government backbenchers felt as embarrassed as we are that this is happening in our country?
The murals that the Noble Lord refers to were provided by our detention contractors and were not commissioned or approved by the Home Office. It's clearly the correct decision that these facilities have the requisite decoration befitting their purpose.
My lords. My lords.
So I suppose the other reading of that is that they got a freebie. I mean, as Paul pointed out, as someone who's visited the centre, it's highly unlikely. But that's a bit like commissioning a new kitchen and then coming home and seeing that they've given you a fridge freezer that you hadn't asked for. At which point Robert Jenrick would go, "Get that fridge freezer out of my kitchen now." And everyone else would go, "Mate, we've got a free fridge freezer." So the murals were just provided by the people we paid to do the decorating. We thought they were going to be doing everything in Battleship Grey. And then they put up some Mickey Mouses. Or Mickey Mice, I don't know. Get them down. So, all right, so 2-1 to Murray on who comes out of this worse. But I'm keen to get Jenrick back up the ladder as well after you get the very latest headlines from Thomas Watts. It is 33 minutes after 10. Gary Burton, who is this programme's painter and decorator. We have. I like to have all the professions represented on the programme. Other programmes have like lawyers that they go to. We've got people a lot closer to the action. Gary's worked at Great Ormond Street. He's tweeted to say that they've got murals on the walls there. Now I know for a fact that there are teenagers being treated at Great Ormond Street Hospital. So I expect Steve Barclay to issue the order by tea time today that any nice murals on the wall, any nice cartoons, pictures of things that are aimed at children must be torn down from the walls of the Children's Hospital because some teenagers are there as well. That seems to be the logic. That's why, for me, Jenrick is the bigger mug. There it is, finally, 10:34. We've got the question. Who's the bigger mug? I've got the biggest mug, as you know, although it's not in the studio with me today. But who's the bigger mug? Murray claiming that, no, we had to take the murals down because they were put up by someone else. Or Jenrick claiming, no, we had to take the murals down because there are teenagers around. 0345 606 0973. Tony's in Yule. Tony, what do you think?
Hi, James. Hi. I'm so glad we're covering this again today.
Oh, the phone is absolutely shocking. We'll try and fix that and we'll get straight back to you. Stephen's in East Finchley. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm ashamed to be English with these guys.
Well, don't be. They don't represent you. They don't speak for you and they don't represent England.
Well, when I first heard this on Sheila's show,
yes,
I went to boarding school, a blind school, and I always listened to Doctor Who, and I still collect it now, and I've met all the people at conventions, and that was from childhood, James.
Yeah, of course.
So how they can say it doesn't affect you when you're a teenager, or you don't need cheering up. Goodness me, these people are from Syria, war places.
Yes.
It's places we've never seen. Places as a blind person, I can't possibly imagine being in Syria, being blind. I wouldn't get the help. I wouldn't have the benefit system such as it is. I would have nothing over there, James. And yet you're going to do me down when I come to the UK because you think that we're different to you. Every human being is exactly the same. And the sooner these Tory guys recognise that, and there are some good Tories. I heard on the Newsagent podcast about a lady, and she was a Tory, and I thought she was amazing.
Yes, that was on this show yesterday as well, actually. But there you go. You're bigging up Sheila. You're bigging up the Newsagents podcast. What am I, Stephen? Chop liver?
No, I do listen to you. That's because I thought I've got to say.
Farris, I think her name was, and it was she was speaking about Harriet Harman's chairing of the Privileges Committee, wasn't she? It was a really powerful speech.
Yeah,
Laura Farris. I'll read you what they say. They say nothing about the... And as a blind person, Stephen, I'm interested in what you think about this. So listen to these words quite carefully from Robert Jenrick. He said, nothing about the decoration of sites changes the fundamentals, that if someone comes to the United Kingdom, we'll treat them with decency and compassion at all times. So he's claiming that it makes absolutely no difference to the delivery of decency or compassion to have welcoming pictures on the wall. What do you, as someone who wouldn't, as you've said, be able to see them, what do you make of that claim?
A load of rubbish. Give them cuddly toy bears.
Bless you. Bless you. Yes, I mean, we did speak, didn't we, to a cartoonist who had offered to go back in there and replace the murals. But, of course, the likelihood of that happening while the Home Office is still desperately trying to cover their own backsides to the point of offering up two completely different and contradictory excuses for doing something so disgusting, that point would seem quite a way off. I thought I'd read this morning as well that they'd... welcome signs in different languages have also been taken down. There you go. I'll read that again. Welcome signs in different languages have also been taken down at the asylum centre. They were designed to greet the asylum-seeking children in their native languages, but were removed as part of efforts to be less welcoming. It is not clear when the signs at the Kent intake unit were taken down, but they are believed to have been removed around the same time as the murals. So if you do have the misfortune of encountering Robert Jenrick any time soon, ask him about the signs as well, because the teenager line isn't going to work there, is it? Why did you take the murals down, honest Bob? Oh, teenagers. Oh, yeah. Sure you did. And the welcome signs in lots of different languages, why did you take them down? Well, there were some children being processed at that centre whose language was not reflected on the welcome signs on the wall. Therefore, in order to spare those children from feeling discriminated against by the absence of their language from the welcome signs on the walls, we decided to take down all of the foreign language welcome signs. Oh, look me in the eye and tell me he wouldn't try that. He's going to try this line about, we had to take down the children's murals because some of the children are teenagers. Why did you take down all the welcome signs? Because we didn't have all the languages. We only had 10. And there are currently 12 different languages represented in the intake to the processing centre. 10:39 is the time. I'm going generic. I'm putting generic 3-2 ahead now. All right? 3-2 ahead. Tony's in Ewell on a better phone line. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm so glad you're covering this again today. It's just awful, and it really does show up what the Home Office is doing in a way that I think other things do.
Yes.
I think that Simon Murray is telling the truth.
Right.
So this is going to be a bit weird, but bear with me. Don't interrupt me.
I won't.
I think that the reason they've taken the murals down, he's right, they weren't commissioned by the Home Office. They were commissioned by the people that the Home Office contracts the running of these centres to. And those people are going to have to carry out the Home Office policies towards those children, some of which we would think are quite inhumane. So from the Home Office's point of view, they can't have the staff showing sympathy or humanising these kids in any way, because that may mean that they'll refuse to do what they're asked to do later on, possibly drag them onto planes to Rwanda, anything like that. So I think that it's targeted at the staff, not the children. Those murals and signs are evidence of the staff's sympathy and empathy for those kids.
So we've got the contract to run as opposed to decorate, because he said detention contractors, didn't he? He didn't say decorating contractors.
He didn't say decorating contractors.
Oh, you're good. So they call them in and they say, well, let's put some nice murals on the wall. And someone perhaps at the meeting might say, well, that's going to eat into our profits. And someone else would say, well, so what? Come on. It's a few murals. These kids have been to hell and back. Let's put some murals. So they go ahead and do it.
And welcome signs in their
own languages. And then honest Bob Jenrick turns up and says, no, you can't be doing that.
You shouldn't be thinking of these people like this. Well, they're not. The whole language coming out of the Home Office is to dehumanise.
I think you've got
people
it.
Seeking asylum.
So we think that Simon Murray might be telling the truth.
Yeah, I think he's telling the truth. I think
sort of telling the truth, because it's still not a reason to take them down, is it? It's not, because what he's trying to convey in that answer to Alf Dubs is the idea that because they were unauthorised, then they had no choice but to take them down. So I think your analysis
is... I think he's kind of brushing over the really horrible bit and not saying that quite out loud. But I don't think he's lying that the reason they were taken down is because that's not the purpose of the detention centre. The staff shouldn't be showing sympathy and affection or empathy towards those children. And having murals there, it's going to change the welcome that the people are given. You know, if you're working in a place with child-friendly murals and welcoming signs, when the kids come in, you'll be like, oh, hello, what can we do? Rather than write you in the corner, or whatever.
Yeah, of course, get in the back of the van.
It's a completely different atmosphere.
Oh, dear. Yeah, so that horrible, means it is horrible, actually, and it does that. So that means your vote for Mug of the Day goes to Jenrick rather than Murray, does it?
Well, Jenrick's the only one telling a lie, so I think.
Yes, or at least there's not even a kernel of truth in what Robert Jenrick is claiming. Whereas with the other fella, you've got that
half a truth,
perfectly plausible theory that it was actually an independent decision taken, which the Home Office then disapproved of for the reasons you describe. It's not as if there's some sort of contractual breach that forces them to take them down. Tony, thank you. It was worth improving your phone line. I think that's the sharpest analysis, perhaps. 10:42 of the morning. The former Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Rowan Williams, who just carries on trying to uphold Christian values. I mean, who does he think he is, this dude? Former Archbishop of Canterbury. He's not a Christian. Honestly, if I want some Christian values, I'll go to Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries. Thank you very much. But anyway, this fella's still touting his Christianity around the place, the former Archbishop of Canterbury. He's described the decision as Dickensian. It follows the Bishop of Dover, another one of these so-called Christians. Honestly, you want to know what proper Christianity looks like? You go and hang out with Jacob Rees-Mogg. The Bishop of Dover criticised the decision to take it down, describing a disdain for children. Rowan Williams told the newspaper, who've really led the line on this, I have to say, it should have been picked up more. You know why it hasn't been. It does seem to me, he said, staggeringly ungenerous. It's as if we wanted to portray ourselves as a sort of Dickensian place where children were punished for being unfortunate, a kind of Oliver Twist world, which is pretty much on the nose of what Tony just described. Kathy's in Windsor. Kathy, what would you like to say?
I think it's generic all the way.
Go on.
Because it was his decision.
It was. Yeah, he was the one walking around the place and said, "Get rid of these murals." Yeah,
exactly. And then to turn around and blame it on being teenagers, it doesn't even make sense. His staff at the centre refused to paint over it.
And of course, taking down the welcome signs makes a mockery of the teenager argument as well.
Exactly. So he doesn't make sense, and obviously he doesn't make sense. He's a cruel, nasty, horrible, vile individual. He rarely makes sense.
Hang on a minute. I'm just wondering whether I should challenge you on any of that. Nope, on you go.
Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say.
4-1 then. 4-1.
There's no doubt it's him. There's no argument.
Let's remind ourselves of what he actually said, because we played the Murray clip a couple of times. This is Robert Jenrick in the House of Commons yesterday answering questions from the shadow. It sounded like Yvette Cooper, actually, but she's not her opposite number. I think it's Yvette Cooper. Either way, he's answering questions.
Is it true that he gave orders to the Asylum Reception Centre to paint over children's cartoons? And if so, why? Because nobody believes that Mickey Mouse cartoons either encourage or deter boats to arrive, and they simply think that this is the minister actually not showing some common decency towards vulnerable children.
I've been clear in answer to her Right Honourable friend that we provide very high quality care at all of the centres in which we support unaccompanied children. We didn't think that the setup in that particular unit was age appropriate, because the majority of those individuals who were unaccompanied passing through it last year were teenagers.
Right you are, Bob. It's 10:45. Speaking of Conservative politicians, someone called Siobhan Bailey took a swing at Carol Vorderman in the House of Commons yesterday. I don't know if you're across this story. When we had Carol on Full Disclosure about a month, was it about 2 months ago? About 2 months ago, 6 or 7 weeks ago. She was really getting into her stride as someone prepared to use her sizable public platform to speak truth to power. I often think at this point it's worth you trying to work out in your mind who criticises this government regularly from a position of power in the media. Carol's doing it pretty much entirely through her Twitter account, so that doesn't count. You can't include that. Same with Gary Lineker. He's only got his Twitter account. He can't go on Match of the Day and start describing the language that Suella Braverman uses as being like 1930s Germany. That would get him into trouble. But remember the effort they put into trying to stop him even using his Twitter to speak truth to power. Carol also really only got Twitter to do it with. So just in your own mind now, make a little list of people with really big platforms in the UK media who use those platforms to tell you the truth about the liar Boris Johnson, or the work-shy Nadine Dorries, and there's long lists of bad things this government have done. Who in the media, TV, radio, or newspaper columns, who's on that list? Because if we were doing it the other way round, we'd be here all day, wouldn't we? You'd have to work through every columnist in the Mail, every columnist in the Sun, every columnist in the Telegraph. Then you've got 2 television stations now dedicated to doing this. A couple of my colleagues, of course, are fairly enthusiastic flag wavers for the Tory government. You've got... I mean, but if you were doing it from the other side, the people that are regularly launching pot shots with a big platform, with, for example, a big show, how long is that list? Really? That's all you've got? Come on. That's not even double figures. That's incredible. So Carol's not even doing it from a position in the media. She's doing it from her social media. But when she did Full Disclosure, I did say to her, you know, that's it. They're coming for you now. They will come for you. And yesterday in the House of Commons, they came for her. Someone, admittedly not a household name, possibly not even in her own household, but someone called Siobhan Bailey accused her of eating political hate for breakfast to get social media hits. It looked to me as if someone was either too silly to understand what Carol Vorderman had tweeted about the Veterans Minister, Johnny Mercer, and his wife, or they were pretending not to understand it in order to score cheap political points. And who better to put it all into context than Carol Vorderman, who will join us after this. 10:52 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Never get on the wrong side of Carol Vorderman. As you will be aware, especially if you've listened to the episode of Full Disclosure that we recorded together quite recently, she is embarked upon an impassioned crusade against some of the corruption and appalling behaviour, egregious conduct that the current government has been embarked upon for a long time, and it has earned the ire of Conservative MPs now. One of them standing up in the House of Commons yesterday to accuse her of eating political hate for breakfast. Someone called Jacob Young tweeting, "I grew up watching this woman on TV. What a horrible little snob she has exposed herself to be." Johnny Mercer has described her on Twitter as a deeply unpleasant person, and Johnny Mercer's wife, Felicity, has been unleashing a cavalcade of criticism on the same platform. What they have been picking on is a tweet Carol wrote pointing out the current electoral calculus in the Plymouth Moor constituency where Johnny Mercer currently sits. And she wrote, "Gosh, what are arrogant Johnny Mercer and his wife going to do for a joint income of £160,000 plus enormous expenses?" Mrs. Mercer, I think, is on Mr. Mercer's payroll. And she added, "Not a degree in sight in spite of expensive private education. So who'd employ them?" Now, I think I know what she meant, but I will shortly ask her herself what she meant. But first, let's hear what this Siobhan Bailey MP claimed that she thought Carol meant in the House of Commons yesterday.
Snobbery about further education and no degree sadly continues to this day. You just have to look at Carol Vorderman's attack on the Right Honourable Member for Plymouth Moor View and his wife. She said that they had not a single degree in sight in the same tweet as "who would employ them." This is the latest example of nonsense. Dismissing a minister who works tirelessly for the armed forces and veterans for not having gone to university is bad enough, but deliberately being condescending about the lives of millions of people who did not go to university is absolutely unforgivable. I used to admire Carol Vorderman an awful lot before she decided to eat so much political hate for breakfast to get social media hits. Now, sadly, I just feel sorry for her.
Carol joins us now. So is it shredded wheat in the mornings, Carol, or political hate?
Well, I don't like shredded wheat. I always have a Rivita, actually.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Context is the key word here, I think,
yes,
isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah. Siobhan Bailey, by the way, also voted for all of Jenrick's policies that you're talking about today. So, but she'd obviously had, like many of them, a little right-wing pile-on me yesterday because of a tweet that I got. But you need the context. This is the thing. So, and also, before I give you the context, because it might be quite boring, it's gossipy, but dull. To say that I'm an educational snob is like, it's so utterly ridiculous. It's unbelievable. I mean, I'll give you, my educational, support of education, it has gone on for decades, absolutely decades. And even in the first lockdown, got a little online school, and we taught 500,000 children free. We stopped subscriptions, which were about £1 a week, and gave people, who'd already paid up their money back, and we kept it open for about 5 months.
Can you put a figure on how much that would have cost you if you
an awful lot of money.
Yes.
Where other people, were taking. Well, we know what they were doing during. They were profiteering from the pandemic.
There's plenty of that going on. So
yeah, and I give bursaries to kids from a disadvantaged background like myself. I worked with David Blunkett on introducing the numeracy hour back in the 90s into primary schools. I've been governor of an inner city school. I mean, it goes on, and like STEM ambassador and so on and so forth. I have never, ever once criticised anyone for not having a degree. Can I just lay that out there? It's madness to think that I would. I've encouraged all children to do the best that they can with every skill that they have, And I've proven it a million times over. I'm in the books and all sorts. I don't really need to say it.
No, you really don't. But possibly, and I don't know whether people are pretending not to understand or whether they genuinely fail to understand what the point you were making in the tweet about Mr. and Mrs. Mercer's degreeless state.
Yes. So this came, and it's a distraction technique,
of course,
from the real story. So this, I'm going to tell you, people don't know yet. But Johnny Mercer's wife has been harassing me for months on Twitter. One day she sent over 60 tweets in my direction. And that's just one day. And a lot of vile abuse, a lot of appalling stuff and words that she used about my private life, about how really misogynistic stuff, actually. Okay. So, but people don't know that. That'll be like a first time that people will know that. To the point where I almost felt like reporting her, to be honest. It was quite upsetting. So, but I said nothing. I did absolutely nothing. She did a podcast, actually, with Rachel Johnson, saying Carol Vorderman drives me effing nuts. She's stupid. She's this, she's that, and all that. I still said nothing. Absolutely nothing. And then he embarrassed himself on television last Wednesday.
Thursday, I think. Sorry.
Sorry?
It was question time, wasn't it? So it'd be Thursday.
No, it was...
Do you know what? I thought, don't correct her. Don't correct her. It's Carol Vorderman on the line. Do not correct her. So no, it was the Wednesday before the Thursday.
And he went on. This is where this recent stuff has started. He went on. Politics. Yeah, to Sky.
Right.
And was asked about, they had run a story about military personnel using food banks. So he was asked about that. And he said, it's a matter of personal choice.
Yes.
They're paid enough, they don't have to use them. It's a matter of budgeting and it's a personal decision. That's fact. So all the papers were then online reporting this, what a terrible thing to say. So I said, even without naming him, that started from his account, puking up emojis. I mean, this is a minister, for goodness sake. All directed at me, not directed at any of the newspapers or anything. It's like an unhealthy obsession that they have. So I thought, let's see where his MP's expenses go to. And lo and behold, criticising the military who have been on a pay freeze for the last, I think, 12 years, apart from 3 years where they had a 2% increase. His wife is employed. It's not allowed now on MP's expenses. They got in just before the ban on that started. And she started on about 15 to 20 because they're given in bands of earnings, and is now on 40 to 45,000 pounds. So in the time where he's criticising military having to use food banks, she has had a 200% pay rise on MP's expenses. So that I was tweeting that out because I like to put facts out. And as you know, that apparently irritated him so much, it was reported in the Daily Express, that he had a meltdown in the Question Time green room, where all he could talk about was Carol Vorderman, which is quite funny, really, isn't it? But, and then went on to have this appalling performance. I mean, one of the worst in Question Time history, I would imagine. So all of that carried on. They were having a go, proper abuse from his wife, where she's saying to someone, literally on Twitter, Carol Vorderman isn't going to shag you. I mean, that's the level we're at.
That was to Brian Moore, I think, the former England front row.
The
happily married.
Yeah, happily married, exactly. So that's the level of abuse about my looks, about my private life, about everything. So on the Friday, it came up on the Thursday night when he was on Question Time. A new wonderful young man who happens to be in the Labour Party, who is a former Royal Marines captain, has been nominated as the candidate for the next election. So I thought this was a joyous thing to celebrate. So I put that out. And it apparently, according to Electoral Calculus, which is a website which says the predictions, it's likely to go back to Labour. So obviously I was celebrating that. And, maybe it was a little clumsy. But what I was trying to say was, because having called everybody grim, mad, rabid, bedwetters. I mean, the abuse that comes from a minister's Twitter account is quite off the scale to everybody. And then, so with even puking up emojis, I mean, really? It's just bizarre. So then I said, but if it's taken out of context, because they're paid over £160,000 between them, what are they going to do when they're unemployed? That was the point I was making. And so, I said that because they're always going on about, private education.
And the reference to not having a degree is a simple reflection of a degree enhancing one's employability.
That's all it was. Right. And I mean, it wasn't my finest, I have to say, but it was based on all of that information. But what the really important thing, because they can go off into the distance, but is what you were saying, which is how the right wing then these messages were sent out, and it was almost like it was a copy and paste attack. I'm very lucky because people see them for what they are. So
it looked coordinated. There are a number of MPs putting very similar tweets.
Totally coordinated. I'm disappointed in Nick Ferrari, to be honest, this morning.
Oh well, Nick's not here. I'm sure you'll make that clear next time you see him. But I will.
Yeah. Yes, I will. But anyway, so that's the full story. But as you've often said, how many people will stick their heads above water? And what I will say is it just makes me more determined.
Well, that was my next question. Are you sure? Because are you sure it doesn't just even subconsciously make you think maybe I won't go for them?
No, because I tell you why. Because if they're having a go at somebody, with my position, and I'm lucky because I've earned money over the years, and I'm comfortably off. So if they would do that to me, it's what do they do to other people? And that's how they keep people quiet. And it's bullying and it's harassment. And I'm not in any way comparing what's happening with Jenrick and the children, but this is a cruel government. They have cruelty at their heart. And, even Theresa May, bless her, was saying about the modern slavery and the amendment that came through from the Lords last night, and it was voted down. And the Siobhan Bailey was voting that down. So it was like there's no protection for these women who come over. I mean, I find it's jaw-dropping how cruel they are. It really is. But no, I'm carrying on. I should carry on regardless, because I know who I am and what I am. So I don't need to defend, really.
Well, thank you for clearing things up, Carol.
Yeah, my pleasure. Oh, and by the way, I hope Banksy does a mural.
Goes in and does them. Well, there's all sorts of offers in place. But no, that would be nice. Carol Vorderman, thank you. I was nearly 6 minutes late for the news, which is a new record, I think. But I thought it was important to get the full story, as opposed to perspectives or parts of it. It is 6 minutes after 11. It is 9 minutes after 11. Apologies to Mark and Bev and Peter and Gary and others. There's still some anger, well, a lot of anger about those murals, but there are other things that we should be talking about today. PMQ's on the way shortly, of course. Lewis Goodall talking us through that this week. And we'll keep an eye on that mural story. I fear it will just go away. I don't think the phone story will, which is the other thing In the news today that, in my opinion, should be getting a heck of a lot more attention, the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's complete failure to hand over information on a phone that was demanded by the COVID inquiry and was supposed to have been delivered by 4 p.m. on Monday. I don't know what to do with that story. I don't know, just open the window and shout out of it or something like that. Or that's why people get so frustrated on social media, isn't it? Hashtag Boris Johnson's phone. Why are people in my industry talking more about the new baby than they are about the failure to cooperate with the COVID inquiry for a former Prime Minister? What's more newsworthy? The birth of another child? I think it's his 14th. Or the failure to hand over a phone to the actual COVID inquiry by the deadline laid down by the judge the former judge, the retired judge that's leading it. Strange times we live in. 11:11 is the time. Complete change now. I'm going to describe you. You're not going to know that I'm describing you until I finish describing you. And then when I finish describing you, you're going to go, oh, my Lord, he was describing me. I want you to call me if you're surprised that you have paid for private healthcare. Okay? If you never thought you'd be that person. And then you can tell me why if you want, although you don't really have to tell me why. But then you have to tell me what it means. What does it mean? Because this is astonishing research, and it's from a YouGov poll found that 17% had paid for some form of non-dental private healthcare, which give or take, that's one in, I mean, it's nearly 1 in 5, isn't it? But they've described, the headlines today describe it as 1 in 6. So 17% of us, 1 in 6 of us, have paid for some form of private healthcare. Previous polls were putting the figure at around 1 in 8. So the number of people who have elected to pay for some form of non-dental private healthcare is growing very quickly. Very quickly. And I mean, I don't want to do the obvious question, which is it game over then now for the NHS model? A lot of people saying it been chipped away at over the years so effectively, little bits being hived off, all that kind of thing. But I don't want to do it that way round. Who did I ask about this? I think it was Angela Rayner, was it, quite recently? It's not as if I interview that many politicians. And I said, can it be reversed? And they're adamant that it can, that you can bring back into, if you like, public control, state control parts of the health service that have been hived off to private sector companies that, of course, turn a profit on everything that they do. But the question that I've got is really about patience rather than politics. Because it's a bit like the conversation we had yesterday about education in a way. For the record, as I'm always honest with you, I told you that my children go to fee-paying school now, not for primary school, but that's very much something that was drilled into me by my late dad. I don't currently have any private health insurance. I don't currently have any private health insurance schemes. But I've been to A&E a few times, and the waits, and particularly during lockdown, the waits are pretty awful. I completely understand why the most common reason given for paying to access private healthcare, some form of non-dental private healthcare, is waiting list. You get to avoid the waiting list. You get, and you could call it jumping the queue, but I'm not even sure that is fair, because you're not going to the front of the queue by paying for it. You're joining a different queue full of people who pay, and it's considerably shorter than the queue full of people who pay only through their taxes. So I want to know whether or not, I tell you what I want to know. I want to know what your relationship is with this, because you can't really fault someone, particularly if it's your child, paying to get medical treatment if the alternative is not getting it or waiting for longer. And yet the threat to the NHS, the threat to the free at the point of care model obviously increases the more this happens, because the more this happens, the weaker the NHS becomes in a way. That's how I see it. But I'm certainly not going to sit in judgment on anybody today. For the record, historically, my point, I always think of my dad. My dad got health insurance as part of his employment on the Daily Telegraph. And thankfully, we never needed it until they found a lump on the side of his neck when I was about 16, 17. And he went into hospital. My dad, being a Yorkshireman, didn't tell us at the time that it could have been really serious. He put all his effort into telling us it was completely harmless and they just needed to take it out and he'd be fine. I think it was his dentist that spotted the problem rather than a health checkup or him. But of course, I found out subsequently that they didn't know it was completely fine until they'd got it out and done it's a biopsy, is it called? I nearly said autopsy. He's not with us anymore, but that would have been a little bit previous. So, and they took it out and it went into a Bupa hospital in Birmingham. And I remember going to visit him. I've told you this. We'd go and visit him, and it was almost a treat. He must have been in there for 3 or 4 nights. We didn't have satellite TV at home or anything like that, so could watch a movie. He had a room service, and I always thought I can get my head around that. If everyone's getting more or less the same treatment, but some people can pay for better food, better telly. I mean, you pay for a phone, don't you? Well, you used to. That little brief period where mobile phones hadn't taken over the universe. You pay for a television. I think when Mum was in hospital after her stroke, you pay for a television. You paid money to have a screen, like a subscription. So there's always going to be stuff you pay for that improve your experience. But I've always seen a difference between that and paying for medical treatment. Give me money, you can have it now. Don't give me money, you wait 6 months. You wait a year. You wait 2 years. So what do you reckon then? Well, have you been surprised to find yourself paying for non-dental health care? And what does it mean? I guess that's the question that I'm asking. What does it mean? Is it silly of me to suggest that every time one of us does it, it chips away a bit at the NHS? I just got that feeling, but it might be me being a bit Wolfie Smith again, a bit undergraduate. Surely the more people do it, the weaker the NHS becomes. But then I say that out loud and I don't immediately have the argument to back up the fear or to back up the claim. It's the less... So more and more people will have to pay because the waiting list will get longer. And I don't know. So there's 2 ways into it. And of course, you don't need to have availed yourself of private health to answer the second question. I'm just interested for reasons I can't really articulate. I'm interested in the moral conundrum, the surprise at finding yourself in this situation. For the record, if one of my children was poorly and they could get treated tomorrow, I would sell a kidney to have them treated tomorrow. I don't think there's a parent alive who doesn't feel the same. I don't really think it matters how committed you could be a Nyrin Bevan's great-grandson. And still, if you're given a choice between your child suffering for another 6 months or your child getting treated tomorrow, if you give me some money and you haven't got any money, you'd sell a kidney tomorrow, right? That's what we do. That's what being a parent means. But that's not the point of this conversation. The point of this conversation is, are you surprised you've done it? And what does it mean? How significant is this statistic, this increase in the number of people avoiding waiting lists by paying for some form of non-dental private health care? 11:18 is the time. We'll get stuck into that after this. It is 21 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where just looking at the fact that 1 in 6 of us now turn to private care as walkouts limit access to NHS. That's the Telegraph headline, bringing the strikes into it, of course, which is, that's their political prerogative. And just to slightly correct the record, we did pay for private IVF. A few of you had texted me to say that's when you've paid for private health treatment. But that's not, it's a medical procedure, but it's not curing an illness. But goodness me, the desperation to become parents would have been something else that I probably would have handed over a kidney for. So we have gone there, but we haven't gone there, if you see what I mean. 21 after 11 is the time. Sonia is in Bewdley, lovely part of the world. Sonia, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
First-time caller,
Welcome.
etc.
Carry on.
Much love to Carol from speaking earlier.
I should say there's a lot of love for Carol coming into the studio, actually, as it goes. But
yeah, awesome
no surprise,
lady,
isn't she?
Yeah.
Karen, go on.
Okay, I've recently had to seek private healthcare after 18 months of pain. And I was treated with the NHS for 18 months and nothing has helped. and the waiting list to have a knee replacement is significant. And so I've made a decision for my sake and for that of my family to go private.
Gosh.
And what's really upsetting is that I worked for the NHS for 35 years, if not a little bit more.
Okay.
And I was a specialist in pain management, so it's quite ironic, really.
What is it that, where
my knee.
Your knee.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's nothing else you can do, is there, really?
No, I mean, I've just had an MRI, and that was on the NHS, thankfully, and that just shows the old expression, bone on bone. It is just
and what is it, the waiting list? Are you on a waiting list?
I'm now on the waiting list to have my knee replaced privately.
But are you on the NHS waiting list? How do you know how long it was,
Yes.
or were you just not? You were. How long would it have been?
After 18 months of being treated without success, then I was going to be in another waiting list for 18 months.
Another 18 months.
For surgery. Yeah. So the waiting list now for my private appointment surgery is 2 months.
And how much, if you don't mind me asking?
I haven't got the bill yet,
right.
But it's going to be in the region of £15,000.
Oh, boy. It's a big operation, isn't it? And
it is.
Sense,
it's a complex joint.
I sense you struggle to square this with your previous career.
I just feel a bit like a traitor, to be honest.
Oh, gosh. But
because I'm so, I'm so proud to work in the NHS. And,
of course.
I retired just before COVID. I was actually a risk manager at Worcester.
Oh, yeah.
And
that's the hospital my mum was in when she had her stroke that I referred to a moment ago, actually.
Oh, was she at the Alex?
Yes, she was.
Yeah. And amazing people.
Yes.
Even more ironically, I know the surgeon. I work with him in the NHS, who's actually going to be performing my private. But it just ruins your life. But
no, well, you don't have to justify it to me, but I sense you do feel you have to justify it to yourself, Sonia.
Well, yeah.
But there it is. I mean, it's if you can raise 15 grand, then you get 14 months of pain-free life that you wouldn't get if you couldn't raise it.
I couldn't face another 18 months. To just sit on the sofa and watch daytime telly, that's not much of a life, is it?
Because the pain is unbearable. I mean, how common is that, do you think? How unlucky are you that the treatment hasn't worked? Or is the treatment really just a way of postponing the point at which they have to put you on the waiting list, and everyone kind of knows that but doesn't say it out loud? Just genuine question.
I suspect that is certainly not uncommon.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you get injections? Did you get an injection?
Oh, yes.
But that does help some people, doesn't it? But it's a postponement rather than a cure.
Yeah, I mean, if you do get any benefit, it is relatively short term.
Right, you are.
I've done it all, and I'm just desperate. I was in tears on the sofa last night.
Dear. Well, good luck. Are you not done? I mean, you're the caller I was thinking of in my mind. Someone who's torn by this, but obviously.
You absolutely hit the nail on the head when you said you don't know if this is you. And I thought, oh my God, this is me.
Sorry.
Absolutely. No, don't worry.
No, but there it is. But I mean, you don't need me to tell you this. You'd be, in many ways, you'd be daft not to do what you're doing. Does it? And don't answer this if you don't want to. But do you share my sense that it might be chipping away? Is this where some of your sense of guilt comes from? It might be chipping away at the edifice of the NHS every time one of us does something like this.
Yes, but I think there's an awful lot more going on.
There is.
That we don't know about.
Yes, of course.
The privatisation that is already taking place in the NHS is really, really, really concerning. Yeah, even my physiotherapy was on the NHS, was outsourced to a private company.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Gosh.
And the communication between the two agencies it doesn't always work. But
I hear you. I wish you well, and roll on the 2 months down the line. Eh? Can I be a bit shit? Whereabouts in Bewdley are you, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, just on Long Bank.
Well, on the river, or?
No, Long Bank going up past the golf course, up towards Cloudstop.
Oh, okay, right, you are. Okay, I get a bit homesick every time someone's on from that neck of the woods.
Now, I'm going to be convalescing in the autumn.
Okay.
So you better get that book out.
Don't you worry. November the 2nd. I'll be good to go, hopefully. Thank you, Sonia. I did. I played Bewdley. Did you come when I did Bewdley with the last one? You can come along, Sonia. Bring your crutches if I get to the Bewdley Festival again. 27 after 11 is the time. Laura is in Romford. Laura, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I recently was exactly me as well, exactly the same situation. I'm really against using private healthcare. It goes against what I believe.
Yeah. Why does it? Because because we think that by using it, we dilute the power of the NHS almost.
Dilute the power of the NHS. Exactly that. But I was really unwell. I'd had COVID and developed pneumonia. It'd been going on for months. Went to see my doctor, who did the basic hemoglobin test, like to check my iron count. It was appalling. They said I needed more investigations, but a haematologist needed to do it. It wasn't the sort of blood test that could be done by a GP. My haemoglobin was in the 30s, and it should be like 130 minimum.
Yeah.
But they said it was a 3 to 4 month waiting list to see the haematologist, and they wouldn't transfuse. No one would transfuse until I'd seen a haematologist.
Right, you are.
I was at the point I couldn't get out of bed, and I ended up having to have £900 plus tests for a private haematologist who I managed to see within a week. But I only was able to have that. And then once I was in the system, once those tests were terrible, the NHS sat up and took notice, but I needed to have those tests in my hand in order to do that. And the only reason that I was able to have those tests was because my parents paid for them. And I'm in my late 30s, I'm a teacher, my husband's also a teacher. We're not on the breadline by any means.
But it is just that choice. Now. I mean, there's two paths in front of you. Yeah. One of them is 10 times longer than the other one. And if you hand over a few quid, then you go down this one.
Yeah.
How much did you pay, did you say?
£900 just for the initial test. It ended up being more like nearly £2,000 by the time all the tests had been done that I needed. But yeah, it just terrifies me because I think it breaks the system bit by bit. And really, in the end, those £900 blood tests will become standard in the way you now have to pay 120 quid for a fill-in.
I was about to say the dentists have gone that way already, haven't they? It does feel as if it's slowly. And where does that leave people who just haven't got the money? It leaves them in a sort of new cohort, doesn't it? A new sector of society.
Like the people with broken teeth.
Health poverty.
The broken teeth people will end up. It'll be the same.
It'll be broken knee people or people who don't get the transfusion that you got as a consequence of being able to produce the results of the test that you paid for.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Well, I hope like the last lady, you can't beat yourself up about this, Laura. There's a cool pragmatism to it.
No, I'm back out of bed. I'm back with my children. I'm back at work, and that's what's important. But it's still not ideal, and I don't feel great about it. More than anything, I feel angry about it.
Yeah, well, that's probably oddly. Oddly, that's probably healthier than guilt, which is what the other option, I suppose. Thank you, Laura, and I'm glad you bounced back already. 11:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 11:33 is the time. Cracking on with this. Two calls there that warmed the cockles of my heart because I do that sort of slightly weird introduction about I'm going to describe you now, but you won't know I'm describing you until I've described you, and then when I've described you, you're going to go, oh my God, he described me, and then I'm going to ring in. And obviously, there's a little bit of me going, what are you talking about? What are you gibbering on about? Just read out the headlines and then invite people to ring. Why do you have to do it in this way? But it works better like that. People feel seen or reached, and it's reciprocal. It works. Comes back at me as well. 11:34 is the time. Tom's in Narberth in South Wales. Tom, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Last year I had to go private for a hip replacement. I'm 57, but we run a small animal sanctuary down here, and with sheep and ponies and that.
They're not that small.
Well, it's a small scale.
Oh, I see. The sanctuary is small. It's not a sanctuary for small animals. Sorry.
Yeah. No worries. It's fine. No, some of those sheep certainly aren't small, that's for sure.
So it's a physical business, isn't it?
It's a physical business, definitely, yeah. And more and more, I was getting more and more disabled, basically, and having to spend sort of an hour in a bath with them and try and even get to the point where I could move.
Oh, yikes! And what was the NHS saying? Because I mean, your plight was clear, but you tell me.
I just said, well, we can't tell you exactly how long it'll be, but it's going to be somewhere between 3 and 8 years. And
is that because of your age?
Just everyone was the same, apparently.
3 to 8 years. So you're in constant pain?
Yeah, constant pain. I was on, 8, cocodamol tablets a day.
Well, that's no good for you anyway, is it?
And Oromorph and things like that. That was sort of getting me through it just a bit.
5 to 8 years? 3 to 8 years? So what did you do?
Well, I had to go. I ended up persuading my other half that I'd raid one of our pensions that was coming up soon. So it cost us £12,000, and it's been money well spent. But
of course,
but it goes against the grain completely. And as you say, you kind of think, well, I just think it's a what's the word, the feeling to the wedge kind of thing, perhaps.
Well, you're the second. I mean, hips and knees and hips. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, but hips and knees I think are going to be the big start, because they're big outlays as well, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's
a big chunk of change.
They call it elective surgery, but I don't think anyone ever elects to have a joint replacement, really.
But I guess it means you're not going to die without it, are you? I suppose. I don't even know what it means. Why am I even talking? I do apologise. That's ridiculous. Can the public visit your animal sanctuary?
It's a private one. Unfortunately, we just do a little sort of bit of Facebook stuff. And things like that.
No, I was going to give you a free advert. That was all. So you just
if people want to Google us, we're just refuge for aged and mistreated animals.
Oh, well, lovely. I bet you do all right. Do you in donations or not?
Not much, no.
Do you not? All right. Well, then let's get. So go and look them up. Have a look at the work that they're doing, because I know the donkey sanctuary down south gets millions of pounds.
Yeah, they do. There's some really good ones, and
marketing.
To be honest, we're quite small. It was a lifestyle choice, but
clear. I get that. I know. I get that sense, and very rewarding and satisfying work it is, but not if you've got a crook hip. You can't go around wrestling sheep with a dodgy hip. Thank you, Tom. Take care. That's lovely stuff. David's in Malden. David, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, it's very pertinent to me, James, exactly the context of the way you put the question. I'm retired, I'm 67, and I've recently been diagnosed with a double hernia.
Right.
And the GP said to me that as you're not working and as you're not in excruciating pain, the NHS will be offering you any treatment. We won't be putting you forward to go on any list. And then she said, have you not got private health insurance?
Actually said that in the GP surgery?
Yes. And I said, I've got to be honest with you. I said, I never thought I'd need to, having contributed for 42 years. Yes. And there's a bigger point here. When I told the neighbour, he said, well, I've been down there, and they said that I've got a bad shoulder, and they said you need physio, but we won't be providing that. You'll have to pay for that yourself privately. Now, the point is, both these services I know were given as a matter of course on the NHS, and if this is no longer the case, what I can see is a gradual erosion and a gradual privatisation by stealth.
Yeah.
And there's another point, is that what about the people, I'm lucky enough I can afford, it's going to cost me £4,500.
How much pain are you in?
I'm not that much pain, but as I went to the private consultant, he said to me, look, it's not going to get better on its own. It'll only get worse. And there's another point, is that the sooner I do the surgery, it's easier for me to do it, and it's less complicated, and also you'll recover quicker.
Right.
And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, where are we heading with this?
Yeah.
If they're not saying to me, you're not a priority, you might have to wait 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
They're saying we're not putting you forward at all.
Ever. Because of your age and status?
Because I'm not working and because I'm not in excruciating pain. Now,
right. So that's triaging in a way.
Yeah, but then there's other services, like I say, with the physio, with my friend's shoulder. That was a matter of course. You used to always get physio. So are they being run as a business because of budgets? Is it a general thing in the country where they're gradually trying to get people to go private to take the pressure off the NHS?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, it's all of the above, probably, isn't it?
Well, yeah. But the way you said in the beginning, are you surprised that you're using private health? I'm thinking now, a lot of people, even your previous calls, we're not being given a choice. If you've got the money, or even know someone who's took a loan out to get, because there is so much pain. So it's not a good direction of travel.
It's really not, is it? And I haven't heard much from Labour about how, if they plan to reverse the direction of travel. But I think we all suffer if it carries on in this direction. And even, because it's not, I'm sure you'd rather spend that $4,000 on something else. I'm sure the last fellow would rather spend that $12,000, leave it in his partner's pension. And
Exactly. And not only that, is a principle here, isn't there? Because what we're doing, we're making value judgments of people who have got money will be treated.
Yes.
People who haven't will be left to suffer. And that's not what the NHS was set up about, was it?
No, and it's not the fault of the NHS. I mean, clearly. Even the doctor saying to you, haven't you got health insurance, is not doing it she's not going to be on commission yet. That is an attempt to get you sorted in a way that she has concluded the NHS simply can't do because of the weight of pressure already on it. And that 3 to 8 year waiting list for a new hip, it's incredible. I think my mum must have just got in time, because she got a new hip a few years ago, and she must have just got in, although she was in absolute agony. 11:41 is the time. Thank you, David. Simon's in Stanmore. Simon, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Just wanted to say I got health insurance. I took it out about 7 years ago because my father-in-law back then unfortunately, he got lung cancer.
Okay.
And we went to see his surgeon after doing the test, and he said, look, it's very aggressive and you need to have the operation quickly. So we asked him how long it was going to be, and he said, I can't do the operation for 11 months.
Right.
Which would have been too long. So we kind of said to him, so what options do we have? What happens if we pay you privately? We didn't have health insurance, but if he pay you privately.
Yeah.
He said, I can do it next week. No. If you pay me equivalent of it was about £35,000 back then. So I got a bit upset and was like, well, how come you can do it next week? And he explained to me, he goes, the problem is not my availability. He goes, I can't book the theatres. That's the problem.
Right.
That causes the waiting list. We can't get the theatres. So we found the money as a family, we paid it, and then they had it done in a private hospital. Gosh. Where they had the theatre space, and he had the treatment. And to be fair to the NHS, unfortunately, he passed away from it. But to be fair, once he'd had the surgery done, we went and had his chemo and radiotherapy done on the NHS, and they were excellent.
Yeah, of course.
But the problem seemed to be getting the theatre space. That was causing.
But that problem gets worse.
List.
I mean, would it be the same theatres for an NHS, or would the private hospitals have their own theatres?
No. We went to he actually did the surgery in a separate private hospital with its own theatres.
So what will happen next, it's happening already, but I don't know if it's happening with that particular condition, is that the NHS will pay the private hospital for the operation. So that was one of the things. That's not for that specific operation, but that is what happens as well. That's what the earlier caller was referring to.
Yes, ultimately, and they pay through the nose for it as well.
That is the problem. Yeah. So you're paying way more than you would pay if it was being done in-house, because... Well, that's the difference between private sector and public sector. Thank you, Simon. Who can argue with Simon after that experience for deciding to get himself some insurance? 11:43 is the time. Gemma is in Thornton Cleveleys. That must be in Lancashire. Gemma, what would you like to say?
It is, and I'm a Kidminster convent girl.
Are you really? Holy Trinity?
I am.
Get lost.
And my friend has just been up from Wolverley, which is not far from where you are.
I know Wolverley very well. How delightful. When were you, can I ask?
Led Zeppelin comes in for his drink at the Queen's.
That's right, Mr. Plant.
So there we go. But and I loved my education. Absolutely loved it.
It was a lovely school, wasn't it? It really was.
Fantastic. And I'm still friends, still up here. Left 60-odd years ago.
60-odd years ago?
Yeah, so I'm old.
Well, you're not old. You're as old as you feel.
I am very old.
You're as old as you feel.
But I'm absolutely committed to our NHS.
Right.
And having said that, when somebody is poorly in your family and they can't walk and they're told they've got to wait 2 years, what do? You just go for it, don't you?
You find it. If you can find it, you find it.
We can give up 3 years holiday.
Yeah.
And that was our priority. So we took the £12,500 hit for a new hip.
A hit, the hip.
And again, it was COVID.
Right.
So I couldn't go in and see Pete. He was there. and he was sent out after 2 nights in a state that shouldn't have been sent out. Had I been in there, I would have kicked off.
Yes.
But I couldn't see him. So our son-in-law actually lifted him out, lifted him into the car, lifted him out to the house. And he wasn't well. I could see he wasn't well. And 2 days later, we rang the ambulance. His leg had swollen up so much, I took his stockings off.
He got an infection.
Ran out all over the lounge floor.
Oh, well, get careful. People are having their lunch, Gemma.
I know. But this is what I'm saying. When you're on private healthcare, it's an algorithm. You've got a 2-night stay regardless.
Haven't got the aftercare in the same way. So then, presumably, you took him, but the ambulance was NHS, and he went to an NHS hospital to get himself sorted.
Did. And the people who saved him were when we came home, and our local practice and the district nurses, who are 1 to 14,000 patients now.
Yeah.
Because they're so depleted in numbers. They came out for 10 weeks. And saw to his dressings and everything. They were fantastic.
Yeah, Mum gets a district nurse as well.
Yeah,
there it is.
And we couldn't have managed without that, James.
No,
and
clearly not.
I costed those 10 weeks out at about £7,000 at least.
Gosh. And that is...
So this is it. It's okay when it all goes well, but you are on an algorithm. You are on a nightly payment. And it is.
And don't forget that. And that's what, I mean, in many ways, that's the perfect for them, isn't it? Because they get to do the profitable stuff when the NHS then has to pick up the heavy lifting that you described.
I mean, he's fine now.
Thank goodness.
I say thank you to all district nurses all through the country because they do a brilliant job.
Unsung. Well, at least they got a nice round of applause every Thursday night during COVID. That's
I know. And so, and as I say, he's well now, but it does put you off. Thinking about it because you think if I need anything complicated or I'm compromised in any way, they're not going to take me anyway.
And so they've got no duty of care, have they?
No.
I don't think.
No,
I mean,
they won't take anybody
on
with ongoing conditions. So, you know.
On a different note, what do you miss most about Kiddie?
Well, I liked Hepworth's window.
Yes.
Can you remember Hepworth?
Well, I think it was.
Voters used to do the Harry.
Would it have become Burton's afterwards?
I think so.
On the corner near the bank next to Lloyd's.
We would do the Harry Worth, you know, and he lifts his arm up. And he looked like a. But we used to get in trouble.
Right, fair enough.
We were before in assembly. Some girls were seen to be performing not ladylike acts.
Sounds like the convent I know.
Yep, down in town. But I loved it. I loved the nuns. Treated us well.
Yeah.
I was quite. You can imagine.
A handful.
Yes.
Lovely.
But I loved it. And I still love going back to Kiddie. And my parents are buried in Bridgnorth, so we go a lot.
Lovely. Yeah. Thank you, Gemma. Well, that's beauty today.
Keep up the good work, James.
I shall do my best.
You're my hero.
Thank you, Gemma. Give our love to Pete. Mind how you go. It's 11:48. It is 11:51. Some remarkable scenes going on at one of the select committees. I think, and I'm always happy to do this, I think we may have to issue a form of apology to Simon Case. Not officially, we don't, I mean, crikey. I think that blaming Simon Case for that ludicrous report into Sue Gray, where they kind of bet the house on nobody knowing what prima facie means. In the context of that, it means at first glance. So the claim that there was prima facie evidence that she'd done something wrong, when of course the official inquiry, independent inquiry, found she'd done absolutely nothing wrong at all. And I'm reading headlines, so we'll listen to the clip shortly. I think Simon Case has just thrown ministers under the bus at this committee and made it pretty clear that it was a deeply political decision to try and put out the notion that she was biased when all of the evidence made it clear that she wasn't. And even more interestingly, we may skip Dorry's Watch today and have a little listen instead to Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, telling the committee that and he uses the phrase, the lingering member for Mid-Bedfordshire, which is quite nice, actually. I wish I'd thought of that one. The lingering member for Mid-Bedfordshire, sending messages demanding to know why she didn't get a peerage. They've been flagged to the Chief Whip, Commons Speaker, and legal advice is being sought as well. It's just irredeemable. But don't forget, Dorries and Johnson have now got juicy jobs with right-wing media. So the question of why are these people not properly held to account? It's much worse than them not being properly held to account. They're getting rewards for being part of the project, part of the process. So now we find ourselves in the unfamiliar position of having to turn to Simon Case for evidence of how awful it is when he's part of the awfulness. On we go. Brunel is in Chingford. Back to the health conversation, Brunel. What would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello. That's a nice name. I've never met a Brunel before.
Yeah, not too many people called Brunel.
It's a lovely name. Are you named after Isambard, or is there a family reason for it?
No.
You're not?
No connection at all.
All right, carry on. Carry on.
I'm now at a stage where I've had to pay for some scans myself. Most of my children are now under health insurance to cover them.
Right.
But because of pre-existing conditions or anything that's being investigated, that you won't get insurance for that.
Right.
I've had no choice but to wait on the NHS. I've been suffering for quite some time to the point where I'm literally now housebound. Things are so difficult. So I've had to sit and do research myself with my condition and symptoms and convince GPs that something was actually wrong, to the point where I've actually had to go in there with symptoms and everything else and indicate, I think it might be this.
Right.
Finally, I'm at the point where they now believe me because they can see there are things happening, but no one's quite sure.
So you've supplemented your own self-diagnosis by paying for scans that you've used to persuade the NHS that you have got the condition that they didn't think you'd got.
Yes. So
Good Lord.
Now they think they know what it is, but I've been referred to a vascular specialist, and one's told me that I'm on a waiting list, but they can't tell me how long the waiting list is. So I've had to go back to GP and say, I need this to be urgent. They've done another referral. I've now just been told by a different hospital that I've got to wait until September the 5th before they can call me. And then if they don't call me by September the 5th, I'm to call them. And then at some point, they may have an appointment for me. So
it's not ideal, is it?
No. So I'm having to pay now. I'm going to go and pay for MRI scans myself so that at least if I have something, I know, first of all, what's happening with me.
Yes.
And then I can go to them and present them with the results and say, there you are.
And why have you taken out private insurance for the children, if you don't mind me asking?
It's because I just thought things are so bad within the NHS. I don't want my children to go through that. I wouldn't want them to suffer the way that I'm suffering at the moment.
I hear you.
I'm still committed to the NHS. I believe in the NHS, but when you're suffering from chronic pain and you have no idea how long you're going to have to wait for, and whether really by the time you're seen, something you'll be in such a horrible, bad way.
I don't think anyone really, however, like I said at the start, even if they were Aneurin Bevan's grandson, I don't think anyone can argue with any of the callers that we've had today, Brunel, least of all you. And that is a grim scenario because it adds to that fear, that sense of chipping away the great edifice of the NHS being death by 1,000 cuts or death by 1,000 people deciding to go private, as opposed to some epic apocalyptic political decision, which is sort of something we've arrived at, isn't it, together over the last couple of years. 11:57 is the time. Lewis Goodall is here to hold our hand as we head towards PM Keys today. So we should get one of Rishi Sunak's rare appearances, one of the Prime Minister's rare appearances at Prime Minister's Questions.
Well, no, because he's in...
so he's not here this week either?
Sorry, James. Sorry to disappoint you.
Moly. I thought that was a joke. I thought it was a hilarious joke about how he's never there, but he's not actually there. This is unavoidable.
Yeah.
NATO is
I think
unavoidable.
in fairness, he as he has said himself, he can't determine the dates of NATO. Gone are those days when Britain could do that. But no, so it's another clash of the deputies. In a funny way, James, look, I think in terms of what they might talk about, I wouldn't be surprised if Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages and his phone, and this is a bit of a story with all the sort of latest BBC imbroglio that's been going on over the last week. It's sort of been missed over the last few days, probably ought not have been. You remember that endless fracas we had.
Well, I did pick up on this at the top of the show.
Yeah.
I can't trust my antennae, but it seems to me a rather more important story even than the new baby that Boris Johnson has
Frank,
has had.
Baby
Frank.
Best wishes
one.
to them.
37th, is it?
Well, at least. look, this is an important story. Listeners will remember the endless back and forth that there was in that sort of sinking Bermuda Triangle of Rishi Sunak, the Cabinet Office, Baroness Hallett and Boris Johnson about a month or so ago, all of them saying, well, we want to see Boris Johnson's notebooks, and it eventually culminated in him saying, I'm very happy to hand over absolutely anything. They can see my notebooks, they can see my WhatsApps and my phone from before May 2021. There may be some security issues,
which was embarrassing for Downing Street.
Which was embarrassing for Downing Street. And lo and behold, the deadline was Monday, and you will be absolutely amazed, and listeners will be absolutely amazed to discover that Boris Johnson has, that the truth has oscillated a little bit since that period. And Boris Johnson has not handed over that phone, so the Cabinet Office can't provide it, even if they wanted to, and it's not clear that they would. And Baroness Hallett finds herself once again in the position, and the COVID inquiry once again, still so young, in a position of not being able to access the documents and the material that they want. And I wouldn't be surprised if that came up.
Does she have sanctions?
She could in the end compel it, through the courts. She could do. Yeah, she could in the end.
I've got a feeling she will.
Well, I suspect, in a way, this is the conversation we were having at the time, wasn't it? Which is, in order for that inquiry to have integrity and to have the public's confidence, it is necessary for the public to believe that they've seen everything that they want to see. And through the Public Inquiry Act, they do have statutory powers to compel evidence in the end. But of course, they would perhaps have to go to court and so
on. We will, of course, cross live as soon as Angela Rayner gets to her feet, live to the House of Commons. The defence from Boris Johnson, or the excuse or explanation, I think, is that some spies have told him he's not allowed to turn it on.
Yeah, exactly. But in the end, that's I'm sure that is not beyond the wit of man and the spies and the spooks and the COVID inquiry to come up with a solution to that.
And we don't know why that advice is in play, because they're frightened it might have been compromised.
The suggestion is because
I don't know, maybe the kind of people he goes on parties with in Italy when he's got rid of his own security service.
Well, that, and also because the suggestion is that Boris Johnson his number was so well known in the years before he became Prime Minister that so many people had it that it may have ended up being compromised in some way or other. The other thing that I think to obviously keep an eye on in this PMQs, James, and the thing that in a way that the sideshow potentially is the exchanges between the front bench. There is a lot of whispers and worry and concern among front benches and elsewhere that perhaps a particularly enterprising Member of Parliament might decide, under parliamentary privilege, to name the BBC presenter who is at the centre of all of the headlines over the last few days. Obviously, if they did that, that would transform the story and reignite it all over again. But that is very much there have been lots of rumours and concerns, and I know at the BBC that this might happen, that an MP decides, potentially on the right of the Conservative Party, decides that they want to...
You say on the right because that casts them as being BBC critical.
Yeah, and potentially, look, it would probably
put the Sun in a hard position, wouldn't it, if he was, if the presenter was named? Because
or it would help them because it would reignite the story.
Except that if it turns out he hasn't broken the law in any way,
that's also possible. But I mean, it's very clear from the beginning, right, that the Sun.
I'm already getting butterflies now. One of us is going to say something.
Well, I know it is.
It's a right. Shall I run through?
And we definitely don't have privilege.
Oral questions to the Prime Minister at the moment: Stephen Bonnard, Craig McKinley, Pete Wishart, Cat Smith, John Barron.
Maybe. I mean, I suspect the Speaker might be
very careful.
I think the Speaker might be quite careful about who he calls today.
Yes, we shall see. Worth keeping an ear on it even after we pull away, usually after, of course, Stephen Flynn, except it won't be him today. It will be
Mary Black again.
Yeah. She was on rather good form last week. So we'll
getting her money's worth.
Anything more in policy areas rather than politics?
Well, mortgages continues to be. I mean, we saw 2-year rates again hit. What was it? Getting on for 7% yesterday.
Scary stuff.
It is scary stuff. It's scary stuff. And often, as you'll know, James, doing this show, people often ring in and say, "Well, that's not compared to the 15% I was paying in the late 80s or 90s." But of course, the truth is, it is exactly comparable because in the late 80s and 90s, relative house prices in real terms were far lower than people who have bought and taken out mortgages over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. So it is crippling for people.
I don't let them on anymore. The people who willfully fail to understand such simple matters.
Well, I'm sure your listeners will be more discerning than that, James. But on my show, sometimes that does happen. Later on a Friday night, after a few whiskies have been taken.
Exactly.
Mind you, it's only 6 o'clock.
Well, maybe just the first whiskey. So we shall look out for all of that. And I mean, you watch these things even more closely than I do. There's a sense on the Conservative front, but certainly a sense with Rishi Sunak, who we won't be seeing today. He's not enjoying it, is he? I mean, he did seem to be enjoying it to begin with.
Yeah, we talked about this last week. He's not. Look, I think it is a grinding job, and people never have sympathy for the Prime Minister, nor should they.
Sure.
But it's one of those periods in politics which is particularly grueling, and you can sort of talk about whether or not he's to blame. But when you've got this. When you have a set of economic circumstances which are just closing in on you, that's what he reminds me of at the moment. The walls are closing in.
It's like the scene in Star Wars, isn't it, when Luke Skywalker is in the rubbish.
They're trying to brace it with some sort of random bit of metal, but it just snaps.
Yes.
And he needs R2-D2. I don't know where this metaphor was going, really, James, to be honest. But he needs R2-D2 to stop
straight to the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know you're a keen historian, so I looked up the last time a Prime Minister missed 2 sessions in a row with other engagements, which was March 1996. And I'm very proud to be filling the boots of Lord John Prescott. But I think it's safe to say he's no Heseltine, Mr. Speaker. Why is it, John Prescott asked, that in Tory Britain, tens of thousands of families are facing repossession, negative equity and homelessness? And can he tell us, 27 years later, why I'm having to ask the same question?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, clearly the Right Honourable Lady did not listen to my previous comments. The Prime Minister is at NATO. Of course, that wouldn't be a problem if she'd had her way. Her old boss wanted to abandon Ukraine, abolish the army and withdraw from NATO, and he certainly wouldn't be going to any summit, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to house building, I will take no lectures from the party opposite on home ownership. My parents would not have been able to buy their own home if it were not for Margaret Thatcher and the reforms introduced by her government, and this government is building on those with record house building.
Mr. Speaker, I think he's taking lessons from the former Prime Minister on telling the facts. The last Labour government worked hard to dramatically reduce the number of children in temporary accommodation. But under the Tories, the number of homeless children has risen by 75%. I'm proud of our record on tackling child poverty. Does the Right Honourable Gentleman feel ashamed of his?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I'll tell you what this government has done. We've lifted 400,000 children out of child poverty. We have introduced the national living wage, something the party opposite totally failed to do, and increased the national living wage by the largest amount ever, meaning £1,800 for working people, and cutting their taxes by doubling the personal allowance. That is the surest way to ensure we lift people out of poverty, and would never have happened with the party opposite.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, it's like the ghost of Prime Minister past is still here. And I tell the Right Honourable Gentleman that he should be careful about the stats he used, because the Children's Commissioner warned the other Prime Minister about peddling false narrative on child poverty around those figures. The truth is, rising bills and soaring mortgages and plummeting real wages are pushing more and more families to the brink. Those already struggling are being hit hardest by the Tory mortgage bombshell and rising food costs. So can he tell us how many primary school children have been pushed into poverty since his government took power?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I would say to the Right Honourable Lady, it is this party, not the party opposite, which extended free school meals to all 5-, 6- and 7-year-olds, something the party opposite failed to do, and it sits alongside many measures we are taking to help people with the cost of living. We are paying half of families' energy bills last winter, funded by our 75% windfall tax, freezing fuel duty, helping families with childcare, and delivering on our pledge to reduce the debt. It may come as a surprise to the Right Honourable Lady, but balancing the books means more than working out how many more millions to take from her union paymasters.
Angela Rayner.
once again, he talks about balancing the books. His party crashed the economy. And he seems to be completely oblivious to what it's like for working people in this country at the moment. New research out today shows that 400,000 more primary school-aged children are growing up in poverty since his government came to office. Why does he think that is?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I will take absolutely no lectures whatsoever from the party opposite about how we help children in the most need. It is record investment from this government in education, £2 billion more this year, £2 billion next year, which is giving those very children the best possible start in life, ensuring that we have the highest reading standards in the Western world. And I have to say to the Honourable Lady, listen, her leader says he hates tree huggers. They seem very keen on hugging that magic money tree.
Mr. Speaker, he doesn't even acknowledge it, let alone explain why child poverty is rising. What hope has he got of solving it? So let me try a simpler question for him. How many kids don't have a permanent address today compared to when Labour left office in 2010?
Deputy Prime Minister.
We can exchange all these numbers across the dispatch box. Mr. Speaker, these are the numbers that matter. There are 1.7 million fewer people in absolute poverty under this government, 400,000 fewer children, 200,000 fewer pensioners and 1 million fewer people of working age, because the single best route out of poverty is a job, and record numbers of people, 4 million more people under this government have got a job. That is the difference between this party and the party opposite, who always leave office with unemployment higher.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, what matters is what people feel every single day at the moment, who are going to work and can't afford their mortgage, can't afford their rent and can't afford their bills because of this Conservative government. There are 55,000 more children without a permanent address today compared to when they took office 13 years ago. We've gone from a Labour cabinet focused on tackling child poverty to Tory ministers who won't even admit the problem. Just like the Question Time in March 1996, they can only offer excuses and not answers. Lord John Prescott said to Lord Michael Heseltine that day, "How can the right honourable gentleman be so complacent in the face of sheer misery created by his government's policies? 27 years on, why are we asking the exact same thing?"
A little bit more if we carry on. Come on, Deputy Prime.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know there's a reshuffle coming up on the other side, but this audition for John Prescott's old job is just getting a little bit hackneyed. It is this government that has lifted 400,000 children out of poverty. The party opposite, I hear the right lady, claiming to be the party of working people, but under their policies, people can't even get to work. They support Just Stop Oil protesters blocking our roads. They support their union paymasters stopping our trains. And of course, they support the hated ULEZ stopping cars across our capital. While Conservatives get Britain moving, Labour are standing in everyone's way.
Mr. Speaker, given the Mansion House Compact does not encourage our pension funds to invest specifically in British companies, what more can the government do to encourage greater investment in our companies, especially the climate technology startups which are increasingly going abroad to find the funding they require to the benefit of our competitors?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I think my honourable friend raises a very important point about both start-up capital and ensuring that we get more money to high-growth companies. I would say that the Chancellor's Pension Compact is a very important step forward and will unlock £75 billion of additional investment. I'm quite confident large amounts of that will go to UK companies, and that sits alongside measures such as the Edinburgh reforms to financial services, again, which will help improve financial services in this country and unlock money for those industries.
SNP Deputy Leader Murray Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, the Deputy Prime Minister dismissed warnings from these benches that mortgage rates were nearly back to where they were after the disastrous mini-budget. This week, mortgage rates have surpassed those levels. How high do they need to go until he and his government takes it seriously?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady knows, people around the world know, that the driver of higher mortgage rates is higher inflation. And higher inflation is caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the post-COVID supply chains. But what we have to do is make sure we halve inflation. It's only by getting inflation under control that we will be able to get mortgage rates down, and that requires discipline. Discipline on spending, discipline on public sector pay, and discipline on energy supply, all of which is lacking from that party.
Murray Black.
Bank of England predict that mortgage payments will rise by at least £500 for 1 million households. The Prime Minister says that people need to hold their nerve. The Chancellor said just last night that mortgage holders should just shop around. Speaking of his own party, the member for South West Devon said, if the circus doesn't stop by Christmas, it's over. Does the Deputy Prime Minister understand that people can't afford to wait until Christmas and that they need help right now?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the fundamental thing we have to do is to halve inflation. That is an approach that the IMF, quote, strongly endorses, because higher inflation drives higher mortgage rates. But that's not all we are doing. With the Mortgage Charter, signed up by 90% of mortgage providers, we are giving people help to extend their terms, to go interest only, and to reduce their monthly payments. Now, that action is supported by Martin Lewis, a real money-saving expert, unlike the big spenders on those benches.
Stevenson.
Last year I visited Abbeyfield House in Wentzfield, and I was impressed by this model of assisted living for older people that gave them the independence.
16 minutes after 12, as Lewis Goodall mentioned earlier, it is possibly slightly more interesting than usual what may transpire in the sort of post headline exchanges at PMQ, so we will be keeping a close ear on that. I'm not quite sure what the rules are with regard to what we can and can't do, so I'll go and swat up now. It is 20 minutes after 12 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, joined by Lewis Goodall to pick over the bones of this week's PMQs. But before that, you will be here next week, of course, with PMQs, but you will be sitting in this chair, Lewis.
I know. I'm your very own Oliver Dowden, I suppose, James, aren't I?
God,
I'm not sure what that says about... Do listen, listeners.
Do tune in. So you're doing it all week?
I'm doing it all week,
Fantastic.
yeah. Try not to break it.
No, well, please, be gentle with them. That was pretty good from Angela Rayner for a number of reasons.
Yeah, it was very good. Look, it was a very well-constructed theme. It really, sometimes, with PMQs and the 6 questions, they can be a bit random. It sort of feels as if they're just sort of throwing.
She's had a lot of practice.
She's had quite a lot of practice now. And, the last couple were, they were fine, but, probably score draws. This one was a clear win for her because she did 2 things. She, first of all, to be honest, kind of showed him up a little bit in terms of the actual facts. She had a kind of litany of different sort of metrics and statistics, which he really didn't have an answer to. He said, well, we could trade on all sorts of areas of social policy, like important ones like child poverty, to which his answer was basically, well, here's my set of statistics, or we can trade statistics all day, which isn't especially satisfactory. And he responded with a series of pretty not the most stellar jokes, I think it's fair to say. I don't think Friday night at the Apollo's got anything to worry about anytime soon. But more than that as well, the overall framing, which was to take this, we have a bright spark in the Deputy Leader's office, whoever came up with this one, they can have an extra iron brew today. Because essentially, comparing it to the last time when the Prime Minister missed 2 in a row, John Major, 96, and that would have been more likely, by the way, because older listeners or PMQs, devotees will remember that back then it used to be twice a week. So it used to be on a Tuesday and a Thursday. So it was more likely if the PM was busy all week that would happen. And of course, basically setting up that the same questions, the same sort of questions were being asked back then by John Prescott to Michael Heseltine, setting up the idea that there is something inevitable about a kind of decline
very
under
clever.
Conservative governments. It was a smart conceit.
Great spot as well. And to come back to it at the end, when you talk about construction, there was a real... Because I think the 3 PMQs ago, 3 ago with Angela Rayner, she got a little waffly. She got a little lost.
Yeah, she kept to the point.
Providing commentary instead of the question. But then to come back to it at the end, that was one of the sharpest PMQ tactics I think we've seen in a very long time.
Yeah.
And as you say, Dowden's jokes, they love hugging the money tree.
Apparently they were literally, someone was saying, who's actually in the parliamentary gallery, was saying that they are quite literally stuck to some post-it notes on the front of the binder. So you can see them coming, when people say you can see a joke coming a mile off, in this case you really can, because you can see him leaning towards the post-it notes, and irrespective of what has gone before, saying, I've got this other thing.
Love hugging the money tree. It would be mildly forgivable if it had been off the cuff. And then, of course, accusing her of trying to audition for John Prescott's job, which she's already got.
She's already basically got, yeah. Not ideal.
Like that probably was off the cuff, bless him. That was, not great.
I think what it shows, right, is that there is right now, obviously politics is all about momentum, and Prime Minister's Questions is a reflection of momentum, and it does not feel, even if you're a Conservative supporter and you're listening to that, I think you would impartially say that it does not feel as if there are any real stinging lines of attack from the Conservative front bench. I felt for a long time now that they've basically been trying to recycle ones that have been extremely effective over the last 13 years, whether it's we heard it there, the magic money tree, there's a little bit now about Just Stop Oil. There's the kind of greatest hits, a roll call of greatest hits. There was, like I said, Coalition of Chaos, stuff that might once have been highly potent, but which now sounds very tired. It's like hearing a record that you once loved and you just sort of played it and played it and played it and played it again, then sooner or later you just kind of get sick of it, you just can't play it anymore.
In fact, on apropos precisely that, the first answer involved a bit of Long Corbyn, didn't it? It was
Corbyn's another one.
Another, which was very, very effective when Boris Johnson was doing it, but just doesn't feel as sharp when...
And in a weird sort of way, it's ineffective on 2 fronts, that, which is that on the one hand, it's just ineffective because, like I said, it doesn't really land, doesn't feel particularly sort of germane to the moment that we're in. But more than that, it risks, one of the strongest charges against the government at the moment is that they're tired, that they're exhausted, they're politically, intellectually exhausted, they've got no ideas. They're living in the past.
Yeah.
And if you are quite literally recycling even political attack lines that were from your own sort of collection of greatest hits from sort of years gone by, it makes you sound like you're just not in the moment that we're in. So, look, these things, it's Deputy Prime Minister's Questions, it's not too problematic.
No,
but
sure.
It's symptomatic of a wider problem.
Exactly that. I'm told that Pete Wishart asked about the murals that we were talking about in the first hour of the programme. We may try and dig that out. Do you want to listen to a couple of exchanges from committee this morning? They're quite fun.
Well, yeah, little surprise. That's nice.
Simon Case, unexpectedly perhaps, has been essentially distancing himself from that report into Sue Gray that ministers elected both to release against advice and to describe as prima facie evidence that she had behaved inappropriately. Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, addressing this directly. Let's have a listen.
The Abbot report noted that the government had provided no evidence that Ms Gray had breached impartiality rules in her conduct after initial contact with the Leader of the Opposition's team last autumn. Can you confirm that that is your understanding of the situation?
Yeah, absolutely can. Obviously not responsible for Acopa's words, but can be clear that we found no evidence that whilst employed as a civil servant, actually at any point, but especially that time, Sue's advice was coloured by party political views or such factors. As the committee will know, Sue has had a long and successful career as a civil servant, I think 40 years or so, and has served governments of all colours and through the process we went through, we discussed with officials and ministers, and nobody produced any evidence that could cast a doubt that Sue's advice was ever coloured by party political views.
And so in light of that, may I ask what your view is of the former Prime Minister's suggestion that her Partygate investigation was politically motivated and quotes, "It is no coincidence that she's gone to work for the leader of the opposition"?
Well, obviously I don't speak for the former Prime Minister, but I refer back, we found no evidence that that Sue's report was affected by party political considerations. And actually, I'm not sure the timeline as we now understand it from the material in the ACOBA judgment quite works. I think, Sue's report was produced early in 2022. Her first contact, as we understand it from the material she's provided to ACOBA, was in October 22, so seems to be a timeline, a gap as well.
Probably as close as Simon Case will come to calling Boris Johnson a big fat liar.
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Because
because what that I think reveals is the shifting sense of power in Westminster, in the sense that, look, Simon Case, there's no love lost between Sue Gray and Simon Case.
Well, that's yes, exactly.
There's no love lost at all. And there has even indeed been speculation that one of the reasons that Sue Gray decided to take this job with Keir Starmer is because she had been overlooked. She felt abandoned by Simon Gray during the Sue Gray inquiry. She felt that she didn't receive the cover and the sort of political support that she needed from the sort of civil service machine. So there's no love lost between them. But of course, Simon Case, like the rest of the civil service, they can see the polls just as much as the rest of us and are looking at them even more closely than the rest of us. And they are now starting to seriously think that in a year's time or 18 months' time, there's going to be a new sheriff in town.
And
that sheriff will be Sue Gray.
Yeah, good grief,
Sue Gray will be the chief of staff in 10 Downing Street. So suddenly she will be, in effect, she won't be his superior as such, but she will be on a level with him. And so I suppose in a sense, there's lots of speculation about whether Case would survive that transition for very long. But, make no mistake, the civil service will already be starting to very quietly think about what that government might look like. And of course, as we get closer to the election, there will be quite literally meetings between the civil service, the permanent secretaries and the shadow cabinet ministers to talk about their programme, what they might like to do. And so, Whitehall is very, very, it's nothing if not extremely alive to the wider kind of political winds, and that is part of that.
Nicely put. And in addition to that, the sort of realignment that's underway, he is confirming that the evidence and the timeline makes a complete mockery of Boris Johnson's attempts to claim that Sue Gray had behaved in any way inappropriately or biased. It's impossible to fit the facts to that claim. This is. Are we going to do this today? Are we ready? Okay. You're probably going to wonder what's going on now, Lewis. Dorries. It's now time for Dorries Watch. It is 33 days since Nadine Dorries promised to resign from the House of Commons with immediate effect. Nadine Dorries is still an MP, and she came up at this select committee meeting as well.
Are you aware of any rather forceful communications, it might be described, sent by the lingering member for Mid Bedfordshire to both to senior civil servants, really, I suppose, threatening, it could be described, to use the platform of the Commons and indeed her own television programme to get to the bottom of why she hadn't been given a peerage?
So, yes, was aware of those communications and have flagged them to both the Chief Whip and the Speaker of the House.
Now, do you think that, have you maybe taken legal advice on whether you think the Honours Brackets Prevention of Abuses Act 1925 could come into play?
Seeking further advice on that question. So, taken initial advice, but asked for more.
Gosh. So that's William Ragg. That'd be the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee. William Ragg, the chair, Conservative MP, of course. Just floating the possibility that Nadine Dorries might have broken the law?
Well, and have you seen, also the other Nadine Dorries news today, of course, is that she is to publish a book.
Called Lost the Plot, I believe.
The Plot.
I beg your pardon.
The Plot. Lost the Plot could be the sequel.
Yeah.
To her account of the Boris Johnson's downfall, which I'm sure will be an impartial and entirely judicious review of events.
Helps us understand why she hasn't spoken in the House of Commons for a year. As
you say, 33 days. I mean, it feels like the Elton John farewell tour was a long thing, but this feels longer.
Yeah, I think Simon Case referred to her as the lingering member.
The lingering,
which again speaks to your realignment analysis, doesn't it? Because he's not remotely interested in staying in favour with these people.
The Right Honourable and lingering member for Bedfordshire.
Lewis, back on Friday and then back here on Monday.
I'm not on Friday.
Are you not doing Friday?
No,
you're just limbering up. You're taking a bit of me time.
I'm not
non-lingering. But Lewis Goodall standing in for me next week from 10 a.m. on Monday morning. So do give him a very, very warm welcome. Up next, you remember Dan Katz-Zeta, who was the biological weapons expert, blacklisted by the government, entirely as a consequence of Jacob Rees-Mogg's attempts to sort of... Well, I'll let him explain to you, because there's been a fascinating development in his story, which he will share with us after the headlines with Amelia Cox. It is 25 to 1. It's a couple of months ago now that Edward Lucas spoke to us about a contact of his who was on the receiving end of some very shabby treatment, it seemed, from the government. He wrote about it in the Times. He wrote, "How about this for the plot of a dystopian novel in which the government blacklists herald a creeping dictatorship. Our hero, let's call him Richard Hannay, is a world expert on an arcane subject of great interest to anyone dealing with national security. His expertise, garnered over many years in government, spans the scientific, legal, intelligence, regulatory and military aspects of the subject. Hannay has written a best-selling book and makes a comfortable living consulting and lecturing. In his spare time, he relaxes by firing off salvos on social media. He detested Donald Trump and supports Ukraine. He mocks nitwitted American commentators who think that London is a Muslim-run hellhole. He has harsh words for the government too on migration, corruption, Brexit and other issues. He does not choose his words carefully. Why should he? This is a free country after all. Or so he thinks, until he gets an email. Dan Katz-Zeta is Richard Hannay, as we revealed on this programme a couple of weeks after Edward's contribution and indeed Edward's column in the Times. Let's begin, Dan, welcome, by reminding everybody what was in that email that you got.
Well, I was uninvited from a conference that I had been invited to speak on the subject of chemical demilitarization, which is getting rid of chemical weapons. And they said, well, social media vetting has resulted in us discovering that you've got content that is critical of government officials and policy. So therefore, we're uninviting you. We're canceling you. They literally used the word cancel.
Now, we spoke at the time about how egregious you found that behaviour to be, how you had failed effectively to identify precisely what your offence was, and you were clearly determined not to take it lying down. What happened next?
Well, coming on your show is part of it. Full spectrum media fight, a political fight in the House of Commons, House of Lords, and a legal fight. I hired a solicitor.
Okay.
And assembled effectively a legal juggernaut, crowdfunded by very good supporters, because honestly, I can't afford the squillions it takes to mount a judicial review. And we've rattled various things out of the government, including an apology.
Would you read it to us?
Yes. Dear Mr. Katz-Zeta, I am writing to offer my sincere apologies for DSTL's error in rescinding your invitation to the Chemical Weapons Demilitarization Conference in May this year. The decision was incorrectly taken following informal checks of your social media posts and due to a misapplication of Cabinet Office guidance, which was referred to in media reports and which applies only to Cabinet Office staff events. This was not in accordance with DSTL's process for organizing events. DSTL would not rescind an invitation of a speaker on the basis that the speaker had criticized the government policy. DSTL has always welcomed individuals to the CWD conference who provide constructive challenge to UK government policy. I would like to thank you for bringing this matter to my attention. I would like to assure you that in response to this incident, DSTL is carrying out a review of its internal processes for event management. Yours sincerely, Dr. Paul Holland said, OBE, DSTL Chief Executive.
Now, we couldn't identify at the time what these rules were. They've never been debated in Parliament. The ones cited in the original email you received were incredibly vague and flimsy. In fact, all we had was an anonymous briefing to the Financial Times last summer, quoting friends of the then Cabinet Office Minister, Jacob Rees-Mogg, that described a process of looking back at 3 to 5 years of posts on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn in search of, and I quote, potentially problematic or controversial material that may contravene civil service values. That has been completely demolished by your letter of apology.
Well, I think so. Part of it is every time my legal team has interacted with the government legal department on this, because it has taken on a life of its own, we've rattled out more disclosures, some of which I can talk about.
And some of which you can't?
No, because I made certain undertakings to be able to see this stuff.
Okay.
There are several policies out there. What's happened in my particular case is they more or less admitted that they weren't really following any particular policy, hence the informal checks. And this is problematic because those policies are still out there. And they've just said it doesn't apply to me. And that's, yeah, fine. I've got an apology. It's taken me a lot of effort to get this apology. But what about everybody else? There's a lot of other people affected.
We identified a few. There's an academic called Dr. Kate Devlin.
Oh, yes. Where's her apology?
And you think this is simply because you managed to bring in the legal big guns?
Well, yes. Yes, I mean, a very, very good solicitor, 3 very good barristers, a hardworking paralegal, some upwards of £8,000 worth of crowdfunded expenses, just to get one piece of paper. And okay, well, fine, thank you. It doesn't address the underlying issues.
Does that mean you're not finished yet?
I'm not finished yet.
What happens next?
Well, we are reformulating, and we have sent new correspondence because various other things have come up as a result of the various things that we found under data protection subject access requests. We found a whole other Cabinet Office policy that we hadn't heard of before. And these things need scrutiny. And so we're going to try to give it that scrutiny. And we're also trying to find more victims of this because I know I'm the tip of the iceberg.
Well, yeah, Edward Lucas, who you've been working alongside, the Liberal Democrat candidate at the next election and a Times columnist, has said that you know of at least 12 people who have been disinvited from government events as a result of these policies. So what does the next stage look like? Judicial review or what?
Well, we've sent in some paperwork, a pre-action letter on judicial review, asking for effectively a reply and more disclosure of documents. And it's going to really be some more back and forth between the government legal department and my excellent legal team.
And are you any clearer on what it may have been that flagged you in the first place?
Oh, even less clear, because one of the things I got under subject access request, where I can actually request legally that they cough up records with my name on it.
Yes.
They can't remember. They kept no minutes of the meeting, and it was an informal meeting.
Do you know who was there?
Oh, don't know.
No.
So
infamy, they've all got it infamy.
Yeah, it's a bit, it was very important that we do this and embarrass the government, but we can't even keep minutes of the meeting.
The suggestion, of course, that some people would be reluctant to come forward because it could be, to paraphrase Edward Lucas, it could be career suicide.
Well, indeed. I think there are some people out there. There are people who hold, trusteeships and directorships, and need those things for their career. And, even a small bit of, controversy can really disrupt things.
Of course, managements don't like it necessarily.
Indeed.
When you bring.
I mean, I'm lucky because I work for myself. I'm self-employed, so I can fight this battle in a way other people can't.
Do you think it's had any impact on your career?
Long term, I don't think so.
Good.
Short term, it's been tremendously draining of time and energy.
I'm sure it has.
It has. It's put things back in my own. It's put writing on my next book back 3 or 4 months. It's put applying for a PhD program back by a term. Those are all recoverable things. And again, this is not really about me. It's about the underlying cause.
Yeah, and that's why you go again, because you feel almost fobbed off. Here's an apology, off you go.
Yeah.
But the actual fundamental problem at the heart of our democracy that put you and others in this situation remains unresolved.
Yes. That's a good way to put it. The arm's length bit of the government that disinvited me has apologized, and I take that in good faith. It's central government where the problem lies.
And still, as far as we know, this was Jacob Rees-Mogg's brainchild. And he, of course, was waltzed over the horizon to...
Indeed, and he's on the Twitter sphere practically every day talking about free speech.
It's funny.
Yeah, it's ironic.
It is. Well done.
Well, thank you.
Looking good. Feeling good. And ready for the next round, I sense. Dan, thank you. And of course,
thank you.
It's important to stress that you're doing it now as much, if not more, on behalf of other people who didn't have the recourse to the law that you were able to enjoy as you are for yourself. And have you written a piece in the Times today as well? I think?
Yes, I'm the Thunderer today.
You are the Thunderer on page 20 of the Times, if you want to read a little more about what Dan's been up to and what he's been up against, actually, more pertinently. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's almost like a proper grown-up radio show this today. We've had 2 guests now, and we've got another one coming up after this. It is coming up to 12:48, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The next guest is we're here for a couple of reasons, actually. Peter Hannington is an author and radio producer with all the big shows on his CV: The World Tonight, the Today programme, News Hour on the BBC World Service. But latterly, he has been an espionage author. And, some of his books feature an old-school journalist who is neither lovable nor charming, which we love the sound of that for a start. But your new book is not. It doesn't feature William Carver, I don't think. It does. It is another William Carver book, forgive me. I'll tell you why I was keen to meet you. It was because of the press release that accompanied the book. Whoever controls the news controls the story, inspired by real-life news scandals that Peter covered during his time producing. You, like me, and probably with rather more experience than I have, are deeply troubled by the notion or the modern interpretation of media objectivity.
Yeah, it's something that throughout my BBC career, from sort of baby researcher and producer back in local radio right through to the Today programme and the World Service, the idea of objectivity and impartiality and balance is sort of mother's milk. Yes. It's banged into you in a big way. And across my career, I came across a number of stories where that model didn't seem to fit. So, going way back to MMR, which I don't know whether you remember.
Yes, of course.
The coverage of that, and there was, for a certain period of time, there were a lot of question marks about MMR and autism, and I was at the time slightly unsure about the way in which we as a radio programme covered that.
Because it was presented as a battle of equals almost. The Andrew Wakefield saying it does, and then pretty much everybody else saying no, it doesn't, but it would reach the BBC listener as if it was a 50-50 conversation.
Exactly. I mean, the jargon is false equivalence. I'm sure your audience will know the term, or false balance. And in my day-to-day working life, I was guilty of this myself. This idea that if you have one side of a story, then you have the other side of the story. So, as you say, it was Wakefield versus almost everyone else. Fast forward a little to climate change, and you end up with a situation where, although the vast majority of scientific opinion, of educated scientific opinion, is telling you that we've got a problem here, still we're booking Lord Lamont or Lord Lawson. Sorry.
Nigel Lawson would pop up on the Today programme with unerring regularity.
And
of course, he was linked to the Global Warming Foundation based at 55 Tufton Street.
Exactly, and I have fixed him myself. I'm not proud of that.
Just tell people how that works, because I'm quite lucky now. We kind of do our own thing, but usually any radio programme would involve booking people from both. So here's a story. You need to get me someone on this side and someone on that side. That doesn't seem problematic until, as you explain, you come up with subjects that haven't really got two sides. But if someone's claiming there are two sides, how else can you do it?
Yeah, well, the model works in lots of ways. I mean, in our parliamentary system,
yes,
you have whether you think there's a broad spread of opinion across the political parties is another question. But you can have a Conservative, you can have a Lib Democrat, you can have a Green, and you can have
representation is where it starts, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it, I've lived through silly examples where we've put people on a programme, a comedian who says that such and such is the funniest thing that, you know, the Fast Show is the funniest programme ever. And that binary approach means that instinctively we have put people saying, no, it's not funny, which, you know, adds...
That's harmless, though, isn't it? I mean, in a great scheme
it's harmless if a bit silly. But when it comes to climate change, when it comes to Brexit, which, you know, I know is a subject close to your heart, does objectivity really work? And can you be objective? And also, is there a way of not being biased? I mean, I work with presenters who have told me that they leave their opinions outside the studio. You know, the moment that heavy door over there closes, their opinions are outside and they are inside and free from bias, and, you know, you might as well, in my opinion now, having sort of been in this game for 25, 30 years, you might as well try and leave one buttock outside. You know, you bring the whole lot in, whether it's your lived experience, your class, your colour, your education, it's all there. And the only honest thing really to do is to acknowledge that you have that and address it.
The problem is, I'm writing about this at the moment by complete coincidence, the problem is, particularly at the BBC, that if your background suggests that you have views that are right-wing, you get a relatively easy pass. But if you're vaguely left-wing, then you will get absolutely pilloried in the press. There was a 25-year-old researcher from the fact-checking department. I'm giving away chapter 3 of the new book here. So, from the fact-checking department of the BBC, who appeared on the Daily Politics and got rinsed by the Mail, the Telegraph. I think the Times definitely went after him. The Express went after him. Even the Sun went after him. 25 years old, first time he'd ever appeared on telly, because his social media demonstrated that he'd campaigned or canvassed for the Labour Party at the previous general election, and he'd even, and this got reported, Peter, you won't believe me, he'd even uploaded a photograph to a social media site saying dogs for Corbyn. And so the suggestion was he can't possibly be trusted on the BBC as a 25-year-old researcher making his debut on a programme that used to be presented by Andrew Neil while he was publishing The Spectator. So that's the kind of thing that we're up against. I mean, by all means, Andrew Neil can do an impartial job on the BBC, just as Nick Robinson can do an impartial job on the Today programme, despite being a former chair of the Young Conservatives. But the other side don't get anything like that, freedom or leeway, and that must be skewing the way that the BBC is running.
I think it is, and part of that is that the BBC is the establishment, and, you know, it is still not representative of the nation that it's broadcasting to. The other part of it is, you know, we're in a culture war, and for the last 14, 15 years, I think the BBC has felt that it's somewhat under the hammer.
Yes.
And I repeatedly thought, and in fact my character William Carver sort of quotes that Orwell quote, that the censor is inside my head. So once you start to feel that, you know, if I say this, if I think this, if I broadcast this, I'm going to get a good kicking, then it's very, very tempting, especially if you're a 25-year-old kid, to think, well, I'm just not going to do it.
Exactly that. I'm going to go back to that chapter and add that Orwell quote after the show today. So I owe you one for that, because that is bang on what I've been trying to articulate. And I guess the most obvious manifestation of this at the moment is probably in the anti-vax movement as well, which the BBC don't have any questions to answer on this particular front, but there are new broadcasters in this country that do, and in America in particular. This utterly anti-science perspective that is presented as a valid alternative to the truth.
Yes, and that's I know you've, you know, I don't want to blow smoke up your ass or not too much, but in your previous book, How Not to Be Wrong, that idea that as we retreat into our little silos, and as technology drives us even deeper into our existing opinion, unless you listen to programs like this, unless you read widely, then you can easily forget that there is another opinion there, and it's hugely damaging.
How do you transport some of these concerns and some of these fears into a topical, authoritative and gripping thriller that which is how it's been described by Charles Cumming, who's also a brilliant writer? How do you sort of link it to your latest page turner.
Well, the climate change and geoengineering are at the centre of this book, and so basically, I think thrillers are a very good way of worrying about things that we should be worried about. You know, and in previous books, Carver has worried about how you tell truth in a time of war, about what technology and the battle for eyeballs and attention is doing to us all, and in this one, it's it focuses on a geoengineer who could save the planet. He could be the guy who the get out of jail free card for the fossil fuel industry and for petrostates, and he could be the hero, but possibly he's not.
So William Carver's job is to get to the truth, and the truth is constantly.
Yeah, he's an old school comment is free, facts are sacred guy.
I love it. It's called The Burning Time, and you can see why. If we had to put numbers on it, I mean, I'll tell you, have we got time? Very briefly. When I was at Newsnight, I got the pleasure of interviewing Pascal Lamy when he was head of the former head of the World Trade Organization, and at the meeting beforehand, this is only a BBC point. They said, well, you're going to have to get someone else on to do the opposite point of view. And I said, well, who? Who can come on and tell Pascal Lamy that he's wrong about the World Trade Organization? And they said, well, we've got Andrea Leadsom. So I had to sit in a studio and say, Pascal Lamy, tell us all about the World Trade Organization. And he did. And I had to turn to Andrea Leadsom and go... You think he's wrong? That's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And it underestimates the audience because they know it's
How much
ridiculous.
damage do you think it has done, specifically with regard to climate change? If the journalism had been better from the start, if Lawson hadn't been allowed over the threshold of BBC studios, would we now possibly be seeing a difference in everything from attitudes to Just Stop Oil right through to attitudes to the severity of the threat?
I think it's huge because we know that going back to 2011 when Steve Jones sort of did that study of the BBC's scientific coverage, he made it very clear that false balance was already causing problems. And I think, if you give people the correct information without false balance, then they'll draw different conclusions.
And you're absolutely right that one of the best ways to do it is via thrillers, because it's a bit like historical fiction giving you history lessons while you're trying to find out who's actually trying to kill Oliver Cromwell. And in your case, you're getting the lessons about media and science while desperately trying to find out where all these disappearing scientists have got to and whether this Clive Winner character is the genius who's about to save the planet. The Burning Time by Peter Hannington it's out now in hardback. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
It's coming up to 1 o'clock. That's it from me for another day. If you've missed any of it, you can listen back on Catch Up at Global Player. All the gizmos are there. Rewind Live Radio, whole show podcasts, all of LBC's shows to catch up on, video clips from LBC and other global stations. So download that for free from your app or store, or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now. 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 Sheila Fogarty.